Chui Mingyu opened his eyes and saw the sky. Not the sky of Seoul. Not gray. The sky was red. It was as if someone had spilled the sunset across the entire horizon and forgotten to clean it up. He was lying on a rocky trail. He was clutching a thermos in his right hand. It was warm. It was intact. He sat up. His head was throbbing. In front of him, a black stone spire, as tall as a 9-story building, jutted out of the ground. The spire reached into the sky and hummed softly. A low sound, as if something were breathing inside the stone. Sacks were scattered all around, dozens of sacks made of coarse fabric. A wooden sign stood next to the sacks. The words were burned into it. Porter number 47, Silver Fang Squad. Report to the sergeant. Mingyu looked at the sign. He looked at the thermos. He unscrewed the lid. He took a sniff. Oolong. His oolong. The very same one he'd been carrying to his sister at 3 in the morning. The last thing he remembered was the truck's headlights. White light, a blow, and the thought of the thermos. The thermos was intact, so everything else was gone. He took a sip. The tea was the perfect temperature. 82 degrees, just the way he liked it. Mingyu closed his eyes and exhaled. Panic later. Tea first. A group of people walked by. 4 men in worn leather armor. One had a gash across his eyebrow. The blood had already dried, but he looked rough, healthy, broad-shouldered. He was walking with difficulty. Another was limping on his left leg. The third was clutching his ribs. The fourth just walked along, staring at the ground. The one with the cut eyebrow stopped. He spat into the dust, then he rasped that he was so thirsty his teeth were chattering, but his canteen was empty. The other porters, who were sitting on sacks nearby, hunched their heads into their shoulders. One turned away. Another pretended to be asleep. The third one jumped up and ran behind the tent. No one looked at the hunters. No one offered any water. Mingyu watched this and didn't understand. Standing before him was a man who was suffering. Mingyu held a cup of hot tea in his hands. The distance between these two facts was 3 steps. He stood up. He walked over. He unscrewed the lid of the thermos. The lid was a cup. He poured some tea. Steam rose into the reddish sky. Mingyu held out the cup to the hunter and said the first one was on the house. If he liked it, 5 copper coins for the next one. The hunter looked at him as if he were crazy, then at the cup, then back at him. Then he took it, took a sip, and froze. He stood there like that for about 10 seconds. The other 3 stopped too. The hunter with the cut eyebrow slowly set the cup down and looked at Mingyu with new eyes. He quietly asked where he was from. Mingyu didn't know how to answer that question. He'd like to know himself, so he said the only thing that came to mind. He said the tea was getting cold and it would be best to finish it. The hunter finished his tea. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a copper coin. Just one. He placed it on the edge of the lid, and he said he'd be back. Mingyu looked at the coin. Small, dull, with someone's profile on one side and something resembling a sword on the other. His first earnings in this new world. He didn't know what kind of world this was. He didn't know what that spire was. He didn't know why the sky was reddish, but he knew one thing. The tea would run out. That meant he needed a teapot. He needed water. He needed tea leaves. He needed a place. He needed to work. Mingyu put the coin in his pocket. And then it happened. Right before his eyes, a line appeared in the air. Translucent, glowing with a soft golden light. It read, "The perfect service system has been activated. First customer served. Satisfaction high. New menu line unlocked. Tip, a 2-hour walk north of the Gray Fang Fault. There is a stream with soft water. Collect water before sunset. The water from the camp barrels is dead." Mingyu read the line 3 times. Then he rubbed his eyes. The line didn't disappear. He reached out and tried to touch the letters. His hand passed right through it. The line flickered and vanished. Mingyu sat back down on the sack. He looked at the thermos. He looked at the black spire. He looked at the reddish sky. And he told himself, all right, so there's a system here. There are customers, there's a menu, there's tea. He's a barista. He knows how to do exactly one thing in life, to pour hot drinks for people when they're feeling down. Apparently, not even death can take away his profession. He stood up and went to look for a stream. The path ran along the base of the spire. Up close, the black rock looked even more terrifying. It wasn't smooth. Its surface was covered with tiny cracks, and something pulsed faintly, like veins. Mingyu tried not to look. The trail led him into the forest. The trees here were tall, their trunks were gray, the leaves were dark blue, not green, blue. He walked and noted the differences. The sky was reddish, the leaves were blue, the coins were copper. People wore armor. There was a spire that made the earth hum. There was a system suspended in the air. There were porters and hunters, and judging by the sign, he was now porter number 47. He found a stream an hour and a half later. The water was clear and cold. He filled his thermos to the brim. He tasted it. Mild, pure, no iron, perfect for brewing tea. Mingyu smiled. For the first time since he'd been here, on the way back, he thought, he had a thermos, just one, 500 milliliters. He had enough oolong leaves left for 3 or 4 brews, then that would be it. After that, he'd need local herbs, local leaves, a local teapot, local cups, local money to pay for all of it. 1 copper coin. He didn't know how much that was worth. He didn't know the prices here. He didn't know the local prices. He didn't know the local rules of trade. He didn't know if there were taxes, licenses, or fines here. He knew only one thing. That hunter had said he'd be back. That meant he'd have a second customer tomorrow, or maybe even a third. When Mingyu returned to camp, it was dark. The reddish sky had turned dark burgundy. The stars here were bigger, and there were more of them. The porters sat in groups around the campfires. Mingyu walked over to his pile of bags. No one had touched his things. Apparently, no one was jealous of porter number 47. He sat down. He took out his thermos. He poured himself a cup of fresh water, just hot water, no tea leaves. He was saving money. He took a sip. The water tasted good. He looked up at the stars. Then he looked at the second sack next to it. Empty. His sister would be sitting on that sack right now. He would pour her some oolong. She would say it was too hot. He would say that was the right temperature. She would roll her eyes. He would smile. Mingyu set the cup down on a rock next to the empty sack. Full, hot, for her, out of habit. Then he lay down on the sacks and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he'd have to find a teapot. Tomorrow, he'd have to find out what the rift was. Tomorrow, he'd have to find out what a rank was. Tomorrow, he'd have to survive. But that was tomorrow. And now. The cup sat on the rock, slowly cooling. Steam rose toward unfamiliar stars. And if anyone had looked at porter number 47 at that very moment, they would have seen that he was asleep. Peacefully, like a man who knows exactly what he'll be doing in the morning. The morning began with a scream. Someone was yelling across the camp that the water caravan was late again, and the barrels were empty. Mingyu opened his eyes. His back ached from the sacks. His neck was stiff. The reddish sky was red again. So it wasn't a dream. He sat up and immediately looked at the rock nearby. The cup was still there, empty. The water had evaporated overnight. He put the cup in his jacket pocket and stood up. The camp was already bustling. Porters were hauling sacks. Hunters were checking their weapons. A line of people in armor stood at the entrance to the spire. Mingyu watched. He could see how the camp was laid out. Tents stood in a ring around the spire. Closer to the entrance were the larger tents, with flags. These were the hunters' squads. Further from the entrance were the smaller tents without flags. These were the porters. Even further out, there was nothing at all, just sacks under the open sky. That was his zone, the zone of nameless numbers. There was one more tent, a large one, with a sign. Mingyu stepped closer and read it. Field Supply Post, Supply Guild, Gray Fang Branch. Inside stood a counter. Behind the counter sat a fat man in a greasy apron. There were cauldrons on the counter. Mingyu peeked inside. One cauldron contained porridge. gray, thick. It smelled so bad that Mingyu took a step back. Another cauldron held soup, a murky liquid with something floating in it. The third contained tea. Mingyu looked at the tea. The water was yellow. Leaves were floating on top, steamed to the consistency of rags. The temperature was clearly boiling. The leaves were ruined. All the nutrients had been boiled away. Only a bitter aftertaste and the color remained. Mingyu looked at this tea and felt something halfway between pain and anger. This wasn't tea. It was an insult to water and tea leaves. He turned and walked away. Now he knew his rival, and he knew that his rival was weak. The first thing he needed to do was find a teapot. Mingyu walked around the camp. The porters had a bunch of junk, lots of junk, broken boxes, ropes, torn sacks, cracked wooden bowls, and one old copper kettle, small, 1.5 liters, dented, with patches of green patina. The kettle belonged to an old porter named Bak. Bak was skinny, gray-haired, with trembling hands. He sat by his pile of sacks, chewing on a piece of hardtack. Mingyu walked over and asked if he was selling the pot. Bak looked at him with cloudy eyes and said the pot cost 10 copper coins. Mingyu showed him his only coin. Bak grunted. Mingyu thought for a moment. Then he took out a thermos. He poured the remaining oolong into the lid. He held it out to the old man. He said that instead of 9 copper coins, he was offering a cup of tea, the kind of tea the old man had never tasted before. Bak stared at him for a long time. Then he took the cup. He took a sip and froze, just like the hunter had yesterday. He sat with his eyes closed. Then he opened them. He looked at the cup. He looked at Mingyu and silently pushed the teapot toward him. A golden line appeared before Mingyu's eyes once more. Customer served. Satisfaction. Very high. A new menu line. Advice. Old Bak knows where wild mint grows in the forest. Ask him. He'll show you. Mingyu asked. At first, Bak didn't want to. Then he said he'd show him if Mingyu poured him a cup every morning. Mingyu agreed. They went into the forest. Bak walked slowly. He was limping, but he knew the way. Half an hour later, they came out into a clearing. Mingyu saw some grass. It was short, with silvery leaves. He plucked a leaf and rubbed it between his fingers. The scent hit his nose. Mint, but not ordinary mint. Stronger, fresher, with a strange, cool aftertaste, as if menthol had been mixed with something floral. Bak said it was gray forest mint. It grows only here. Nobody needs it. Hunters don't gather it. Porters don't know what to do with it. Mingyu knew. He filled his pockets to the brim. When they returned to camp, Mingyu cleaned out the mess kit with sand and water from the stream. Then he built a small fire between the sacks. He set the pot on it. He poured water from the thermos. When the water reached the right temperature, he tossed in the gray mint leaves. Not boiling water. 80 degrees. Exactly. He counted the seconds. 30 seconds for the first steep. He poured it out. Second steep. 45 seconds. He poured it out. Third. 1 minute. The infusion was pale green with a silvery sheen. The aroma filled the surrounding space. Several porters turned their heads. One came closer. Mingyu poured some into the lid of his thermos. He took a sip. The mint unfurled. A cool freshness swept across his tongue. Then warmth rose from his stomach. Then something strange, a slight tingling in his temples. And suddenly, the headache that had been tormenting him since morning simply vanished. Mingyu froze with the cup in his hand. He looked at the infusion. He looked at the leaves. In this world, herbs possess a faint mana. Ordinary people can't sense it. But if you brew it correctly, if the temperature is just right, if the timing is precise, if the movements are correct, then the mana is released, and the tea ceases to be just tea. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he felt it. Around noon, yesterday's hunter arrived, with a cut above his eyebrow. He brought 2 others with him. Mingyu was sitting by the fire with a kettle. The hunter said this was the guy they were looking for. Mingyu poured 3 cups, 2 for 5 copper coins each, 1 for free. The first one gets it for free. That's the rule. The two newcomers took a sip and exchanged glances. One said it was the best thing he'd had in the last 6 months in this damned camp. 10 copper coins in his pocket, plus 1 from yesterday, 11. By evening, 4 more had arrived. Rumors spread quickly through the camp. By sunset, Mingyu had 32 copper coins. He learned that 100 copper coins equal 1 silver coin. 10 silver coins equal 1 gold coin. He learned that a bowl of porridge at the guild's canteen cost 3 copper coins. His cup of tea cost 5. More expensive than the porridge, but people paid for it because the porridge was gray and his tea was silvery green and smelled like a dream of home. That evening, Mingyu sat by the campfire and counted his money. 32 copper coins, small, dull coins. He spread them out on the sack. He looked at them. 4 years ago, he had opened a coffee shop in Seoul. The first day of business had brought him 12,000 won, $3.50. Back then, he'd also sat there in the evening, counting, and he'd smiled too. Because it's not about the amount, it's about the fact that people came and came back. He pulled the few remaining gray mint leaves from his pocket. He placed them in his palm. He looked at them. Tomorrow he'd have to gather more. Tomorrow he'd have to find a second kind of herb. Tomorrow he'd have to ask someone for some clay cups. There won't be a line of 7 people drinking from a thermos lid. Mingyu brewed the last cup from the leftover oolong. Earthy oolong. His oolong. He set it next to the empty bag. For his sister. He lay down, closed his eyes. 32 coins, 1 pot. His pockets were empty, and tomorrow there would be more customers. He drifted off to sleep and saw his coffee shop in Seoul, a small one, with a wooden counter, with a bell on the door. The bell would ring when a customer walked in. There was no bell here, but people came anyway. On the 3rd day, Mingyu woke up to the sound of someone standing over him. He opened his eyes. Standing over him was a man in chainmail with a silver fang patch on his shoulder, broad-shouldered, shaved to the scalp, with a square jaw. The man looked down at him without blinking. He said he was Sergeant Park of the Silver Fang Unit and that Porter number 47 was supposed to have reported to him 2 days ago. Mingyu sat up. He said he didn't know where to report. Sergeant Park looked at him for another 5 seconds. Then he said that a porter carries sacks. Period. No trading, no cooking, no sitting by the campfire. He carries sacks of provisions from the supply train to the entrance of the rift, 4 trips a day. Each sack weighs 30 kilos. Late, fine. Damaged cargo, fine. Talking to hunters without permission, fine. Mingyu listened and did the math in his head. 4 trips, 30 kilos each. The distance from the supply train to the entrance to the rift is about 800 meters. He looked at his hands. The hands of a barista, not a porter. The sergeant turned and walked away. Mingyu stood up. He looked at his mess kit. He looked at the sacks. He had no choice, for now he was a porter. If they kicked him out of the camp, there would be no customers, no water, and no mint. He hoisted the first sack onto his back. 30 kilos. His back cracked. His knees buckled. He set off. The 800 meters to the entrance of the rift seemed endless. The sack pressed down on his shoulders. The straps dug into his skin. After 200 meters, he stopped. He readjusted the sack for a more comfortable fit. He kept going. After 500 meters, he began counting his steps. It helped. 1, 2, 3, 4, like the seconds it takes to brew tea. 340 steps to the entrance. He memorized the count. He set the bag down at the entrance. The hunter-receiver didn't even look at him. He just pointed with his finger where to put it. Mingyu walked back empty-handed, and that was bliss. The second trip was harder. The third was even harder. After the fourth, he lay on the ground and stared at the reddish sky. His hands were shaking. His back was burning. Calluses had appeared on his palms, red and wet. He lay there for 10 minutes. Then he got up. He built a fire. He set the pot on it, and he began to work, his real job. By noon, the first customer arrived, then the second. By evening, he had served 11 people, 45 copper coins for the day, plus yesterday's 32. That made 77, 23 short of a silver coin. Between carrying sacks and brewing tea, he had very little time left. Mingyu realized he needed an assistant, or at least someone to keep an eye on the pot while he hauled the sacks. That evening, something happened that changed everything. He was sitting by the fire, brewing the last batch of mint tea, when he heard footsteps. Not just one person, many. Heavy armor, the clang of metal. The camp suddenly fell silent. The porters around him looked up. Some stood up. Others stepped aside. A squad was marching down the trail. 12 men, armor of a different caliber, not the worn leather of the Silver Fang hunters. Plate armor, dark red, with gold engravings. Each one bore a symbol on their shoulders, a spear in scarlet flame. The Scarlet Spears. Mingyu heard a porter nearby whisper that they were S rank. A woman led the way, tall, a head taller than most of the men in the squad, broad shoulders, armored shoulder guards, dark hair tied in a bun, and a scar across her entire face, from her right temple, across her nose, to the left corner of her mouth. Old, white. She walked steadily, back straight, gaze fixed ahead. She didn't look at anyone. Captain Alex Reed. Mingyu didn't know her name, but he looked at her. 3 seconds, the system kicked in. A line appeared before his eyes. Client scan, chronic migraine from mana overexertion, 7 years, less than 4 hours of sleep per day, intolerance to the scent of roses, association with her mother, bad news from home this morning, stress level, critical. Preferences, nothing sweet, nothing bright, something simple and warm. Mingyu read the line and sprang into action. He pulled a few mint leaves from his pocket. No, not that. Mint is too bright, too fresh. She doesn't need freshness, she needs warmth. He looked around. By his campfire lay a bag of provisions he'd been carrying around all day. A standard ration. Inside were barley groats, dried chamomile, and honey in a clay pot, sealed. From the guild's kitchen. Mingyu opened the pot. He sniffed it. The honey was old, but honey doesn't go bad. He took the chamomile. He rubbed it between his fingers. The chamomile was over-dried, but it was still usable. Ginger. He needed ginger. He didn't have any ginger. He looked at the bags around him. He walked over to Back. He asked if he had anything for a cold, something spicy, a root. Back rummaged through his things and pulled out a small, shriveled root. He said it was fire root. It grows near hot springs. It's like ginger but stronger. Mingyu took it. He sniffed it. Ginger. Different, but ginger. He returned to the fire. He boiled some water, let it cool to 75 degrees. He tossed in some chamomile. 30 seconds. He added a thin slice of fire root. He dripped in some honey. 1 drop. No more, he thought. She needs salt, not sweetness. Salt. So it isn't cloying. So the warmth isn't gentle but reliable. He took a pinch of salt from his ration, tossed it into the infusion, stirred it, tasted it. The chamomile added softness. The fiery root added warmth to his chest. The honey tied the flavors together. The salt took away the cloying sweetness. This wasn't tea. It was an embrace in a cup. Mingyu poured the infusion into the only clay bowl he'd traded for that afternoon with another porter in exchange for 2 cups of mint tea. He set the bowl on the edge of his makeshift counter, a plank laid across 2 sacks. Next to it, he placed a rye cracker from his ration. 1. A small one. And he sat down. The Red Spear's squad marched past. Captain Reed was leading the way. Mingyu didn't call out to her. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer her any. He just sat there. The bowl stood on the edge of the plank. Steam rose in a thin wisp. The scent of chamomile and fire root wafted through the evening air. The captain walked past. She took 3 steps, 4, 5. She stopped. Mingyu saw her freeze. He saw her back tense, how she slowly turned her head. Her nostrils quivered. She turned around, walked over to the counter. looked at the bowl, looked at Min-gyu. He was silent. She was silent. 10 seconds. Then she sat down on the sack across from him, took the bowl in both hands, brought it to her face. She inhaled the steam. She closed her eyes. She took a sip. Min-gyu watched. He saw the tension drain from her shoulders. He saw her jaw relax. He saw the wrinkle between her eyebrows smooth out. She drank slowly, in small sips. Then she took a cracker, took a bite, chewed for a long time, as if she were remembering something. She sat with her eyes closed for 10 minutes. Min-gyu didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there beside her. When she opened her eyes, there was something in them he hadn't expected. Not gratitude, not surprise, confusion, like that of a person who had forgotten that such things happen. She set the empty bowl on the board. She took a coin out of her pocket. She placed it next to it. She stood up. A gold coin, not a copper one. A gold coin. Min-gyu looked at the coin and was about to say it was too much. She was already walking away. She turned over her shoulder and said one sentence. "Tomorrow, there'll be a line of people from my unit here. Get ready." And she left. Min-gyu sat there, staring at the gold coin. 1 gold coin. That's 1,000 copper coins. That's 200 times more than he'd earned in 3 days. He picked up the coin. It was heavy, still warm from her hand. A line appeared before his eyes. Customers served. Satisfaction. Exceptional. A new menu item. Recipe, moon mint infusion. Moon mint grows 3 days' journey to the north. Hunter Kim Jae-ho from the Silver Fang Squad has a map. Properties of moon mint: relieves mental fatigue, restores mana, suppresses chronic pain. Min-gyu read it 3 times. Relieves mental fatigue, restores mana. If this is true, then it's not tea. It's a potion, one that can be brewed in a kettle, without an alchemical laboratory, without a license from the Alchemists Guild, made from herbs that grow for free in the forest. Min-gyu hid the coin. He lay down on the sacks. Tomorrow it's the S-rank squad's turn. He needs more cups, more water, more chamomile, more fire root. He needs a plan. He closed his eyes and began to count. 12 people in the squad, 1 cup for each. Everyone has their own problems, their own aches, their own preferences. The system will show. He'll brew it. 12 different cups for 12 different people. Min-gyu smiled in the darkness. For the first time in 3 days, he felt anticipation rather than anxiety, like before the morning shift at the coffee shop. When the door is still closed and you're standing behind the counter waiting for the first customer, and you know that today is going to be a good day. The morning of the 4th day began with preparations. Min-gyu got up before dawn. While the camp was still asleep, he went down to the stream and filled up on water. 2 full thermoses. Then he went to Baek for some fire root. Baek gave him 3 pieces in exchange for a morning cup of coffee. Then he went to a porter named Jae-hun, who sold odds and ends. Min-gyu bought 4 clay cups from Jae-won, rough, crooked, cracked, 10 copper coins apiece. Then back to his campfire. He laid everything out on a board, a pot, cups, herbs, honey, salt, fire root, mint, chamomile. He looked at his arsenal. 6 ingredients, 1 pot, 5 cups counting the thermos lid, 12 customers. The math didn't add up. He'd have to wash the cups between servings. I'd need a second batch of boiling water. I'd need an assistant. Min-gyu looked around. The porters were waking up. Most were heading to the guild's dining hall for their morning porridge. He noticed a girl. Young, thin, with dirty hair tied back with a rope. She was crouching by the bags at the far end, eating something from a bowl with her hands. Min-gyu watched her for 3 seconds. The system kicked in. Client scan. Porter, no number, unregistered, works for food, chronic malnutrition, cold, early stage, elevated body temperature, preferences, anything warm. Min-gyu brewed some ginger tea, simple. Ginger root, water, a drop of honey. He approached the girl. She flinched and pulled away, like an animal accustomed to people only doing her harm. Min-gyu set the cup on the ground in front of her. He told her it was free, that she had a cold and that this would help. The girl looked at the cup, then at him, then at the cup again. She took it, clutched it with both hands. Her hands were red and chapped. She took a sip, closed her eyes, drank for a long time, in small sips. When the cup was empty, she looked at Mingyu and, for the first time during their conversation, parted her lips. She asked why he had done that. Mingyu said he needed help. If she washed the cups and tended the fire, he would feed her 3 times a day and pay her 5 copper coins. The girl was silent for a long time. Then she said her name was Ha-Yun, and that she agreed. A line appeared before Mingyu's eyes. Customer served, satisfaction, high, new line, Park, Ha-Yun, partnership potential, high, abilities, accurate with numbers, good memory for faces, spatial organization, advice, entrust her with finances. Mingyu took note. Ha-Yun got to work right away. She washed the cups, she built a second fire, she gathered stones to make the pot stand more stable. She worked in silence, quickly, precisely. Mingyu watched and realized that the system hadn't been wrong. By noon, they had arrived, the Red Spear Squad, 12 people, no armor, in ordinary clothes. As if they'd come not to war but to a tea house. Leading the way was a tall man with a short beard and kind eyes. Behind him was a woman with a bow on her back, then 2 twin boys, then a burly man with a warhammer slung over his shoulder, then 7 more. Captain Reed was the last to arrive. The bearded man approached the counter and said that the captain had ordered them to come here, and that if the tea turned out to be bad, they'd tear this tent down to the last plank. Then he smiled. Just a joke. Mingyu didn't smile. He was working. He looked at each one for 3 seconds. The system spat out a line for each one. The bearded man, Jae-seon, tank, chronic joint pain, misses his wife, likes bitter things. Mingyu brewed him strong mint tea without honey, with a pinch of salt. Archer, Mira, marksman, dry eyes from constantly aiming, anxiety, likes sour flavors. Mingyu squeezed a wild berry he'd found that morning by the stream into the water. He added the mint, a sour, cold infusion. Mira took a sip and looked at him in amazement. The twins, Han and Ho, swordsmen, both tired, both hungry, both love sweets but are too shy to admit it in front of each other. Mingyu poured them identical cups, chamomile with double honey. He placed a single plate of crackers between them. They exchanged glances and reached for a cracker at the same time. For the first time in an hour, Mingyu saw one of them smile. The big guy with the hammer, Goran. A scary name, a scary man, 2 meters tall, arms like tree trunks. The system showed insomnia, nightmares, a fallen partner, guilt, can't stand silence. Mingyu thought for a moment, what to give a man who can't sleep because of nightmares? Not mint, not chamomile. He needs something heavy, something that would settle on his stomach like a blanket. Mingyu brewed a barley decoction, thick, dark, with fire root for warmth. No honey, no sweetness. He poured it into the largest cup and set it in front of Goran. Goran took the cup in one hand. The cup looked like a thimble in his palm. He took a sip. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders slumped by 0.5 centimeter. Mingyu noticed. Goran sat and drank in silence for 20 minutes. He didn't leave until he'd finished it. Mingyu served each person their own drink, 3 seconds for each, a separate recipe for each. Ha-Yun washed the cups between servings. She boiled water. She handed out the ingredients. She worked like clockwork. When the last of the 12 had finished his cup, Mingyu served Captain Reed, the same chamomile, the same fire root, the same drop of honey and pinch of salt, the same cracker. The captain drank in silence. Then she stood up. She looked at Mingyu. She said 2 words, "Every day," and she left. The squad followed her out. Bearded Jae-seon lingered. He turned to Mingyu and said that the captain had slept for 8 straight hours last night for the first time in 7 years, and that if anyone tried to hurt Mingyu, they'd first have to get past 12 S-rank hunters. Then he left. Mingyu stood at his counter, a wooden board resting on sacks, 5 crooked cups, 1 dented pot, and 12 regular S-rank customers. Ha-Yun stood beside him, counting coins. Each of the 12 paid 1 silver coin. 12 silver coins, more than he'd earned in all the previous days combined. Ha-Yun finished counting and looked at him. There was something new in her eyes, not distrust, not yet, but something resembling interest. She said he needed a proper tent, and proper dishes, and a proper schedule, and that if he kept working like this without a system for keeping track of his finances, he'd get robbed within a week. Mingyu looked at her. He said she was right, and that starting tomorrow she would be in charge of the finances. Ha-Yun blinked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said she needed a notebook and ink. Mingyu nodded. That evening, he sat by the campfire. Ha-Yun sat across from him, using a stick to draw a table of income and expenses in the dirt. Mingyu brewed 2 cups of mint tea, one for himself, one for her. From the same leaves, from the same water. He set her cup down beside him. He didn't say anything. Ha-Yun looked at the cup, then at him, then back at the cup. She picked it up, took a sip, didn't say anything, but Mingyu noticed that she was drinking more slowly than usual, as if she didn't want the cup to run out. A week passed. 7 days. In those 7 days, Mingyu's world had changed. He now had a tent, a small one, made of coarse canvas, but a tent nonetheless. Ha-Yun had bargained for it from a wagon driver for 8 silver coins. Inside stood a folding table, 2 stools. On the table were 3 pots, 1 for water, 1 for tea leaves, 1 spare. On a shelf cobbled together from crate boards stood 12 clay cups, not crooked, normal. Ha-Yun had found a potter in a village half an hour's walk from the camp. She ordered 20 cups at 3 copper coins apiece. A piece of cloth hung above the tent's entrance. On it, Mingyu had drawn a cup with steam rising from it using charcoal, a sign, her first sign. The stream of customers grew every day. Hunters from Silver Fang, hunters from other squads, even a few porters who had been saving up copper coins for weeks to afford a single cup. Mingyu established a rule: 3 copper coins for porters, 5 for hunters, S-rank silver. Ha-Yun asked why the prices were different. Mingyu said it was because porters had less money but needed the tea just as much. Ha-Yun looked at him as if he were an idiot. Then she wrote the prices down in her notebook and didn't argue anymore. By the end of the week, Mingyu had 3 gold and 47 silver. He knew this because Ha-Yun counted every evening and reported down to the last copper coin. She kept a notebook, expenses, income, ingredients, number of customers, peak hours. Mingyu looked at her notes and thought the system hadn't been wrong when it said high partnership potential. But besides money and customers, something else had appeared over the week. Something else had appeared. Problems. The first problem was Sergeant Park. On the 5th day, he came to Mingyu's tent and said that porter number 47 had made only 3 trips yesterday instead of 4. Fine. 20 copper coins. Mingyu paid. On the 6th day, the sergeant came again. He said that trading in the camp without G-Guild was prohibited. Fine. 50 copper coins. Mingyu paid. Ha-Yun clenched her teeth and said it was extortion. Mingyu said that was the price they had to pay for being on foreign territory for the time being. The second problem was the porters. Not everyone was happy. The 3 porters who had previously sold water from the camp barrels looked at Mingyu with hatred. His tea was taking away their customers. On the 6th day, one of them approached the tent while Mingyu was out getting water. Ha-Yun was inside alone. He told her that if the tent didn't disappear by tomorrow, she'd regret it. Ha-Yun didn't tell Mingyu. He found out because Old Back had seen it and told him. Mingyu looked at Ha-Yun. She looked away and said she could handle it herself. He didn't argue. But that evening, a female hunter approached his tent. She was young, not very tall, wearing light leather armor, with a short sword at her belt. Mingyu looked at her for 3 seconds. The system displayed Kang Mira, a D-rank hunter, Silver Fang squad, chronic pain in her right shoulder, early stage cold, loneliness. 4 days ago, he'd given her some free ginger tea when she walked by with a red nose and watery eyes. She remembered. Now she was standing in front of the tent, saying she'd heard about the threats, and that if anyone touched this tent, she wouldn't care that she was only D rank. She knew where to strike. Mingyu thanked her. He poured her a cup of mint tea with honey. She sat down and drank it in silence. Then she asked if she could come by every evening, not for tea, just to sit. It's warm here, and it smells nice. Mingyu said she could. Kang Mira started coming by every evening. She'd sit in the corner of the tent, she'd drink tea, sometimes she'd read, sometimes she'd just sit there, and anyone who wanted to do anything bad to the tent would see the girl with a sword in the corner and decide that today wasn't the day. The third problem was the most serious. It arose on the 7th day. At noon, a man whom Mingyu had never seen before approached the tent. He wasn't young, neat, in clean clothes, without armor, with a leather folder under his arm. He introduced himself as an inspector from the Supply Guild. He said he'd received a report of unauthorized commercial activity in the Greifang Fault Zone. He asked to see a license. Mingyu didn't have a license. He didn't know a license was required. The inspector jotted something down in his folder. He said it was a serious violation. The penalty was 3 gold pieces, or the closure of the stall. Mingyu looked at the inspector. For 3 seconds, the system kicked in. Client scan, inspector from the Supply Guild, 3rd rank in the bureaucracy, tired of traveling around the camps. His 7-year-old daughter, she misses him. She hasn't eaten anything but the standard rations for 3 weeks. Heartburn. She loves sweet pastries. Mingyu didn't argue. He didn't haggle. He didn't ask for a discount on the fine. He said he understood and that he would pay. Then he asked the inspector to sit down while he got the money ready. The inspector sat down. Mingyu placed a cup in front of him. Chamomile tea with double honey, mild, warm, no acidity, no mint, just what a person with heartburn needs. He placed 3 rye crackers next to it. The inspector looked at the cup, then at Mingyu. He picked up the cup, took a sip. His expression didn't change, but he drank it all. He ate the crackers, all 3 of them. Mingyu counted out 3 gold coins. He placed them on the table. And next to them, he set down a small pouch. He said it was a gift, not a bribe. A gift for the inspector's daughter. Inside the pouch were crackers with honey. Mingyu had made them that morning. He dipped the rye crackers in honey and dried them over the coals. A simple treat, a child's treat, warm. The inspector looked at the little bag. He picked it up, opened it, sniffed it, then closed it, put it in his pocket. He took 3 gold coins, put them in his folder. He stood up. He looked at Mingyu. He said the inspection was complete. No violations were found. The fine was canceled, and he left. Mingyu stood there, watching him walk away. 3 gold coins lay in the folder, but the inspector had said no violations were found. So the 3 gold coins weren't a fine. It was just money he'd taken, and the report would be clean, because the crackers for his daughter outweighed the 3 gold coins. Mingyu sat down. Hayun stood nearby with her mouth agape. Then she closed it. Then she said, "Those are 3 gold coins." Mingyu said, "That's the price of peace of mind." Hayun was silent for a moment. Then she said she hated this world. Mingyu looked at her and said the world was just the same as it had always been. It's just that few people in it offer warmth to those who are tired. Hayun turned away and silently went to wash the cups. That evening, Mingyu summed up the results of the first week. Regular customers, the Red Spears Squad, 12 people. Every day, the Silver Fang Hunters, 7 to 10 people. Every other day, one-time customers, 5 to 8 per day. Porters, 2 to 3 per day. Revenue, 3 gold pieces and 12 silver pieces, minus expenses, tent, cups, ingredients, fines, net profit, 1 gold and 70 silver. Hayun read the report to him in an even voice. Then she added that, excluding fines, the profit would have been 2 gold and 20 silver, and that a license was needed. Mingyu nodded. He knew, But a license cost 10 gold pieces, and it was issued only by the Supply Guild, the very same guild that fed people gray porridge and murky soup, the very same guild he was competing against, a vicious circle. To trade legally, you need a license from the guild. To get a license, you have to pay the guild. The guild won't give a license to a competitor, Mingyu thought. He sat by the fire and thought. Ha-Yun sat next to him and waited. Then he said that a license wasn't necessary. What was needed was for the license to be unnecessary. Ha-Yun asked what that meant. Min-ji said that if his tea became important enough to the hunters, no guild would be able to shut him down, because the hunters wouldn't allow it. He recalled Jasun's words, "If anyone tries to harm you, they'll have to get past 12 S-rank hunters. That's not a license. It's better than a license. It's the protection of those who need you." Mingyu looked at the fire. Then he took out a thermos. He poured 2 cups, one for himself. He set the other on a rock for his sister. Ha-Yun looked at the second cup and at the empty spot next to it. She didn't ask anything. She just sipped her tea and continued counting the coins. The night was cold. The stars were large. A low rumble came from the rift. Somewhere inside the black spire, battles were raging. Hunters were fighting monsters. And here outside, by a small tent with a cup drawn in charcoal, 2 people sat. One was brewing tea. The other was counting copper coins, and both were doing what they knew how to do. Each in their own way, each in their own place. Mingyu closed his eyes. Tomorrow he needed to find the hunter Kim Jeho, the one who had a map to the Moon Mint. If he obtained the Moon Mint, his tea would cease to be just tea. It would become a potion, and then his tent would cease to be just a tent. It would become an apothecary, a field kitchen, a place of power, a place where weary hunters are served something warm and aren't asked why they're crying. Mingyu fell asleep with that thought, and on the rock nearby stood a cup. It was growing cold. The steam was dissipating into the night air, and if his sister could see this from the other world, she would have said that he was doing everything his own way again. But she would have smiled, because doing things his own way always worked out best for him. Mingyu found the hunter, Kim Jeho, the next morning. He turned out to be a short man in his 40s with a quiet voice and a habit of constantly looking over his shoulder. A C-rank hunter, Silver Fang Squad, specialization, reconnaissance. Mingyu approached him as he sat by the campfire sharpening his knife. He looked at him for 3 seconds. The system showed chronic fatigue, knee pain, homesickness, a wife and 2 children back in the village. He hadn't seen them in 4 months. He likes hot and salty food. Mingyu sat down next to him. He held out a cup, barley broth with salt and fire root. Kim Jeho looked at the cup. He looked at Mingyu. He said he'd heard about him. That the whole camp had heard. That the tea porter was now the main topic of conversation after the monsters. He took a sip, froze, finished it. Mingyu asked about Moon Mint. Kim Jeho set down the cup. His expression changed. He said that Moon Mint grows in Silver Hollow, a 3-day journey to the north. It's a dangerous place, not because of the monsters there are weak, because of the road. Mountain trails, landslides, one wrong step and you'd plummet 200 meters down. He has a map because he went there 2 years ago with an expedition. Half the expedition never returned, not because of the Moon Mint. It's because they ran out of water on the 3rd day in the mountains. Mingyu listened, then he asked how much the map cost. Kim Jeho looked at him for a long time. He said the map wasn't for sale. But if Mingyu brought him a cup of this very brew every day, in a week, he'd draw a copy. Mingyu agreed. 7 days, 7 cups, 1 map, he could wait. While he waited, things in the tent went on as usual. Ha-Yun reorganized everything. She divided the workday into 3 shifts. Morning shift, from dawn until noon. The main rush, hunters before entering the rift. They need something invigorating, mint, fire root, strong infusions. Afternoon shift, from noon until sunset. Those who've returned from the rift, tired, wounded. They need something restorative. Chamomile, honey, warm barley tea. Evening, after sunset. Free time. Hunters come just to sit. They need something calming, mild mint, warm water with honey. Silence. Minju looked at her schedule and thought that 5 years of studying to become a food engineer hadn't given him as much knowledge of logistics as this girl had gained in a week of observation. Hyun didn't just count money, she counted people. She knew who came in the morning, who came in the evening, who ordered the same thing, who tried something new every time. She kept a customer notebook, name, rank, unit, preferences, frequency of visits. Mingyu asked how she knew all this. Hyun shrugged. She said she'd been a porter for 3 years, 3 years of hauling sacks, 3 years of watching how the camp operated, how people moved, how money flowed. When you're at the bottom, you see everything that those at the top don't notice. On the 4th day of waiting for the map, Mingyu was hauling the morning sacks, his 3rd trip. His back was already aching as usual. The sack weighed heavily on his shoulders. He was walking along the trail toward the entrance to the rift, counting his steps. 218, 219, and then he heard a scream, not a scream of pain, a scream of rage. He stopped. Ahead of him, at the entrance to the rift, stood a group of people, hunters from an unfamiliar squad, 5 men. Sacks lay scattered around them. A porter sat on the ground nearby, a young guy. From the blood on his face, Mingyu could tell he'd been struck. One of the hunters stood over him, saying that the sack was torn, that half the potions had spilled out, and that this piece of meat would pay for it all with his own skin. Mingyu looked at the sack. The sack was indeed torn, but the tear ran along a seam, an old seam with rotten threads. The sack had torn on its own. It wasn't the porter's fault. The porter knew that. The hunter knew it too. But the porter was just a piece of meat, and the hunter had rank, and in this world, rank is always right. Mingyu stood there with the sack on his back, 30 kilos. He could have walked past. He should have walked past. He was porter number 47. No rank, no power, no say. He set the sack down on the ground, walked over, took out a thermos, poured a cup, held it out to the hunter, said the hunter must be tired after the raid and that here was something hot. For free. The hunter looked at him, then at the cup, then back at him. He told him to get lost. Mingyu didn't leave. He crouched down next to the porter. He looked at his face. A split lip, a bruise under his eye. Mingyu took a clean rag out of his pocket. He dampened it with water from the thermos, warm water. He gently pressed it against the split lip. The porter stared at him in horror, as if Mingyu were doing something unthinkable. The hunter stepped toward him, grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. Mingyu hung in the air. His feet didn't reach the ground. The hunter was a B rank, strong, vicious. He said he'd asked politely, and that a second time would be rude. Mingyu hung in the air, thinking he was about to be struck, and that it would hurt, and that there was nothing he could do. He closed his eyes. There was no blow. Instead of a blow, there was a sound, metal against metal. Mingyu opened his eyes. Standing between him and the hunter was Kang Mi-ra. Her short sword was pressed against the hunter's wrist. She was 2 heads shorter than him, 3 times thinner, D rank versus B rank, but she stood her ground. She said this man was under the protection of the Scarlet Spear Squad. The hunter looked at her, then at the patch on her shoulder, the silver fang, not the red spears. He laughed. He said that a D rank from another squad had no authority over him, and then, behind Kang Mi-ra, Goran appeared. 2 meters tall, a warhammer slung over his shoulder, S rank. He didn't say a word, he just stood there, watching. The B rank hunter set Mingyu down on the ground. The squad left in silence. Goran looked at Mingyu. He looked at the porter with the battered face. Then he said one word, tea. Mingyu nodded. He brewed 3 cups, 1 for Goran, 1 for Kang Mi-ra, 1 for the porter. The porter drank, his hands trembling. He said his name was Jeon Tae-hyun, that he'd been a porter for 2 years, that he got beaten every week, that he was used to it. Mingyu listened. Then he asked if Tae-hyun knew how to carry water. Taehyun said he could. Mingyu said he needed someone who would walk to the stream twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, pay 10 copper coins a day and 3 cups of tea. Taehyun agreed. A line appeared before Mingyu's eyes. Client served. Satisfaction high. A new line. C on Taehyun. Potential. Above average stamina. Good sense of direction. Knows the location of all water sources within a day's journey. Advice: Taehyun knows the way to a hot spring in the east. The water from the hot spring contains minerals that enhance the effects of herbal infusions. Mingyu smiled. Another piece of the puzzle. Another person. Another water source. On the 7th day, Kim Jae-ho brought a map, drawn on a piece of leather, neatly drawn, with marked trails, with notes on dangerous areas. It indicated the location where moon mint grows. Mingyu unfolded the map on the table inside the tent. Ha-yoon stood beside him. Taehyun peered over his shoulder. A 3-day journey north, mountain trails, landslides. They'd need food for a week. We'll need a rope. We'll need a guide. We'll need someone to stay in the tent and brew tea while he's away. Mingyu looked at Ha-yoon. She understood without words. She said she could handle it, that she had recipes. Mint tea, chamomile with fire root, barley tea. 3 options. She memorized the temperatures. She memorized the steeping times. Mingyu shook his head. He said it wasn't about the recipes, it was about who you were brewing for. Ha-yoon frowned. She didn't understand. Mingyu explained. Each customer isn't just a cup. Each customer is a person. Jason has sore joints. He needs a hot cup. Mira has dry eyes. She needs a tart, cool one. Goran has insomnia. He needs a heavy, thick one. Ha-yoon listened. Then she opened her notebook. The customer's page, names, preferences, everything was written down. She looked at Mingyu and said she'd manage. Mingyu nodded. He trusted her. The next morning he left. With Taehyun. Taehyun was carrying a bag of food and a rope. Mingyu carried an empty mess kit and a thermos. Ha-yoon stood by the tent and watched them walk away. She didn't wave. She didn't say anything warm. She just told them not to die because she didn't want to have to find a new boss. Mingyu smiled wryly. They walked all day. The trail climbed into the mountains. The forest remained below. The blue leaves gave way to gray rocks. The air grew thinner, colder. By evening, they had set up camp on a rocky ledge. Taehyun built a fire. Mingyu brewed some mint tea. They sat by the fire and looked down. The camp at the rift was visible as a scattering of lights, small and distant. Somewhere among them, the fire in his tent was burning. Where Ha-yoon was now brewing tea for 12 S-rank warriors and trying not to show how nervous he was. Mingyu took a sip of tea. He looked up at the stars. Up here, they seemed even closer. Taehyun asked why he needed moon mint. Mingyu replied that he wanted to make healing tea. Taehyun was silent for a moment. Then he said that healing was the Alchemy Guild's job, that potions cost gold, that if Mingyu started selling healing tea for silver, the Alchemy Guild would come after him just as the Supply Guild had. Mingyu nodded. He knew that, but he also knew that a hunter who couldn't afford a potion for 5 gold pieces could afford a cup for 1 silver piece, and that between 5 gold pieces and death from one's wounds lies only a single cup of properly brewed tea. He had no intention of asking the guild for permission to save people. They fell asleep by the campfire. On the 2nd day, the trail narrowed. On the 3rd, they reached Silver Hollow. Silver Hollow lived up to its name. The rocks here were silvery, not gray, silvery to be exact. They glistened in the morning light as if someone had scattered coins all over the ravine. Taehyun stood at the edge and looked down. The ravine plunged 300 meters into the depths. The walls were nearly vertical. Something bright and green glimmered at the bottom. Mingyu took out the map. Kim Jae-ho pointed out the descent on the western wall, a narrow trail, steps carved into the rock, old, very old. Some had crumbled away. Taehyun tied a rope around a boulder. They descended slowly. Mingyu held on to the wall. His fingers clung to the ledges. His knees were shaking. He wasn't afraid of heights. He was afraid that if he fell, he would smash his pot. An hour later, they were at the bottom, and Mingyu saw the moon mint. It grew at the bottom of the ravine along a narrow stream. The leaves weren't silvery like those of gray forest mint. They were white, pure white, with thin blue veins, and they glowed, faintly, barely noticeably, but in the shade of the ravine it was visible. Mingyu crouched down. He plucked a single leaf. He rubbed it between his fingers. The scent hit his nose and went deeper, into his temples, into the back of his head. As if someone had pressed a button and turned on a light inside his head. Mint, but not just mint, something more, something that smelled not just of freshness but of clarity. The system displayed a line: Moon Mint, a mana plant, properties confirmed, relieves mental fatigue, regenerates mana when brewed correctly, suppresses chronic pain with regular use. Brewing temperature, 68 degrees. Steeping time for the first infusion, 45 seconds. Warning: temperature above 70 destroys the active properties. Rebrewing is not possible. 1 leaf, 1 cup. Mingyu read it. 68 degrees, not 70, not 65, 68. A 2-degree difference between medicine and useless water. No one in this world had ever brewed with such precision, because no one knew it was important. The Alchemists Guild distilled herbs into potions using fire and retorts. They boiled them. They evaporated them. They condensed them. Brute force, an industrial approach, but all it took was brewing it right, like tea. Mingyu picked the leaves for 2 hours, carefully, one by one. He didn't snap the stems. He didn't trample the roots. He left every third bush untouched so new ones could grow. Taihyun helped. Mingyu showed him which leaves to pick, the young ones, the top ones, with intact veins. They gathered 2 full bags, about 300 leaves, 300 cups, 300 times to relieve fatigue, 300 times to help my mother recover. On the way back up, something happened that Mingyu hadn't expected. They were halfway up the wall when the step beneath Taehyun's foot crumbled. Taehyun hung from the rope. The bag of food fell down. Mingyu lay on the trail, clutching the little bags of moon mint to his chest and held onto the rope. His hands were on fire. His calluses had burst. Blood was flowing down his palms. He pulled. Taehyun was heavier than him. But Mingyu kept pulling. 20 seconds, 30. Taehyun found a foothold. He pulled himself up. He swung over the edge of the trail. They lay side by side, breathing. Mingyu looked at his hands. The skin was torn down to the flesh, red, wet, the hands of a barista, not the hands of a hero, but they had held on. Taehyun looked at him. There was something new in his eyes. Not gratitude, something deeper. He said that Mingyu could have let go of the rope. The bags of mint were worth more than a porter's life. Mingyu looked at him and said that nothing is worth more than the life of the man who carries water for you. Taehyun turned away. His shoulders were shaking. Mingyu pretended not to notice. He took a rag out of his mess kit. He bandaged his hands. They descended the mountain and spent the night at its foot. Mingyu brewed moon mint for the first time. 68 degrees. He gauged the temperature without a thermometer, by the bubbles at the bottom of the kettle, by the speed of the steam, by the sensation when you hold your finger a centimeter above the water. 5 years behind the bar, thousands of cups. His body knew the temperature as well as a musician knows a note. He dropped in a single leaf. 45 seconds. The infusion was almost transparent, a light bluish tint. The aroma was delicate, not minty, floral, as if mint had decided to become a lily. Mingyu took a sip. The first sip, and he felt it. The headache that had been tormenting him since morning from overexertion vanished. It didn't fade gradually. It vanished, as if someone had flipped a switch. The fatigue in his muscles remained, but his head cleared, as if after 10 hours of sleep. Mingyu sat with the cup in his hands, staring into the fire. He was holding something the Alchemists Guild sold for 5 gold pieces, a mana restoration potion, a clarity potion, a migraine remedy, and all of it in a single leaf brewed at 68 degrees. He poured a cup for Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun took a sip. He froze. Then he looked at Min-gyu with wide eyes and asked what it was. Min-gyu said it was tea. Tae-hyun said it wasn't tea. That his back had stopped hurting, that for the past 2 years he'd been waking up with lower back pain, and right now it was gone. Min-gyu nodded. The return trip took 2 days instead of 3. Tae-hyun knew a shortcut through the Eastern Pass. As they approached the camp, Min-gyu saw the tent from a distance. It was still standing, intact. Smoke was rising from the campfire. Ha-yoon was sitting at the entrance, alive, with a notebook on her lap. Ming-yu walked over. Ha-yoon looked up. She looked at him, at his bandaged hands, at his dirty clothes, at the pouches on his back. She said nothing about his hands. She said that during the 5 days he was gone, the camp had taken in 2 gold pieces and 30 silver pieces, that Captain Reed had come by every day, that Goran had asked where he was, that a new guild inspector had come by but saw Kang Mi-ra with a sword and left, that 3 rival porters no longer come near the tent, and that she needed a second pot because she'd burned the other one. Min-gyu listened. Then he took a single sheet of moon mint out of the pouch, white, with glowing. He placed it on the table in front of Ha-yoon. She looked at the leaf, then at him. She asked what it was. Min-gyu said it was the next level. The next morning, Min-gyu brewed moon mint for Captain Alex Reed. She arrived as usual. She sat down. Min-gyu placed a bowl in front of her. Not chamomile, not fire root, moon mint. The captain picked up the bowl. She inhaled the steam. She frowned. She didn't recognize the scent. She took a sip. Min-gyu watched. He saw her eyes widen. He saw her pupils flutter. He saw her set the bowl down and press her palm to her forehead. A migraine. 7 years of migraines caused by mana overexertion. 7 years of pain that no potion could relieve because potions healed the body, but the pain was in her mana. Moon mint healed her mana. Captain Reed sat with her eyes closed for 3 minutes. Then she opened them. She looked at the bowl. She looked at Min-gyu. There was something in her eyes that he had seen only once before, in his sister's eyes, when he gave her the first cup he had made himself. Gratitude that went beyond words. The captain said 2 words. "How much does it cost?" Min-gyu said, 1 silver coin, as usual. The captain took out a gold coin. She placed it on the table. Min-gyu said that was too much. The captain said he didn't understand. That over the past 7 years, she had spent more than 100 gold coins on migraine remedies, that not a single one had worked. But his cup, for just 1 silver coin, had done what the entire Alchemy Guild had failed to do. Min-gyu took the gold coin, not because he wanted to, because refusing would mean saying his tea wasn't worth it, and his tea was worth it. He knew that. By the end of the day, he had served moon mint to the entire Red Spear squad. 12 cups, 12 reactions, each one different. Jae-seon said that for the first time in a year, he didn't feel his joints. Mira said she could see more clearly. The twins, Han and Ho, fell asleep right at the table, a healthy, peaceful sleep. Goran just sat there in silence. But when he stood up, for the first time in a month, he didn't reach for his hammer, because he didn't need to hold on. Min-gyu stood behind the counter and watched it all. He was brewing tea, just tea, leaves and water. But here, in this world where strength decided everything, his tea became a source of strength. Not the kind that destroys, the kind that restores. That evening, Ha-yoon counted the day's takings, 14 gold pieces in a single day. She looked at the number in her notebook, then at Min-gyu, and she said they needed a bigger tent. 2 weeks later, Min-gyu's tent was no longer a tent. Ha-yoon hired 2 carpenters from the village. They built a wooden canopy, 4 posts, a roof made of thick fabric, 3 tables, 12 stools, a shelf for cups, a separate area for brewing tea sheltered from the wind. A new sign hung above the entrance, not charcoal on a rag, but carved from wood. A steaming cup, and beneath it the words, "Warm Steam." Ha-yoon came up with the name. Mingyu wanted to call it simply Tea House. Hayun said that Tea House was boring, that people didn't need a name but a promise. Warm steam was that promise, that it would be warm here. Mingyu didn't argue. She was right. The number of customers grew. Word of Moon Mint spread through the camp like smoke. Hunters came from other detachments, from distant tents. Some walked 2 hours just to get in line. Mingyu set a limit, 20 cups of Moon Mint a day, no more. 300 leaves make 300 cups. If they gave it all away in 2 weeks, there'd be no supply for a month afterward. They needed balance. Hayun agreed. She introduced a reservation system. A customer would arrive in the morning. They'd sign up for a time slot. They'd arrive at their appointed time. They'd get a cup. They'd leave. No crowding, no arguments, no 2-hour lines. Mingyu watched her manage the flow and thought that if Hayun had been born in Seoul, she would have become the CEO of a restaurant chain, or a bank, or the country. In the 3rd week, the first real threat arrived, not from the Supply Guild, from the Alchemists Guild. He arrived in the evening, a tall man in a dark blue cloak, hood, gloves, a retort-shaped brooch on his chest, the symbol of the Alchemists Guild. He stepped under the awning, sat down at the table. He didn't take off his hood. Min Zhao looked at him for 3 seconds. The system displayed, Third Circle Alchemist, name hidden, physically healthy, mentally tense, high level of suspicion, preferences none. He hadn't come for tea. Mingyu approached and asked what he'd like. The alchemist said he wanted the tea that heals. Mingyu asked what he needed to be healed from. The alchemist paused. Then he said he didn't need to be healed from anything, that he had come to investigate, that rumors had reached the guild that a certain porter was selling herbal infusions with healing properties, that this was a violation of the Alchemists Guild's monopoly on the production and sale of magical remedies, that the punishment for this was confiscation of property and 10 years of hard labor. Mingyu listened. Then he nodded. He sat down across from the alchemist. He said that he wasn't selling magical potions. He was selling tea. The alchemist said that if the tea had magical effects, then it wasn't tea but a potion. Mingyu said that by that logic, any water had magical effects because it quenched thirst, and thirst kills. The alchemist fell silent. Mingyu continued. He said that his tea consisted of leaves and water, no alchemical procedures, no retorts, no distillation, no magical formulas. He simply brews herbs in water. If that counts as alchemy, then every grandmother who brews chamomile tea for a cold is a criminal. The alchemist removed his hood. He was young, about 30. He had dark circles under his eyes and a gaunt face. He looked at Mingyu and said it wasn't his decision to make. He explained that he had to take a sample and bring it to the guild, and if the analysis revealed a magical effect, they would return with an order. Mingyu nodded. He brewed a cup of moon mint. He set it down in front of the alchemist. He said that this was his sample, and that if he wanted an honest analysis, he should try it himself first. The alchemist looked at the cup, then at Mingyu. Then he picked up the cup, took a sip. Mingyu saw his eyes widen, saw him set the cup down, saw him run his fingers along his temple, how he frowned. Then he looked at Mingyu with an expression Mingyu already knew well, a mixture of astonishment and bewilderment. The alchemist asked how. How could ordinary leaves and water produce such an effect? Without retorts, without formulas, without the crystallization of mana. Mingyu said it was the temperature, the time, the movement, the proportions. Everything needed for magic is already in the water and the leaves. You just have to be careful not to kill it with boiling water. The alchemist sat there for a long time. He finished his cup. He stood up. He said he would take the sample to the guild, but that personally he didn't consider this alchemy, but rather something they had forgotten. He left. Mingyu watched him go. Hayun stood nearby, her face pale. She said that the Alchemists Guild wasn't the Supply Guild, that they had an army, and mages, and prisons, and that if they decided his tea was a potion, no S-rank hunters would be able to help. Mingyu knew. He also knew that he couldn't stop. 300 leaves, 300 cups, 300 people who would feel better. He couldn't stop brewing tea just because someone had decided that the right temperature was the guild's exclusive privilege. The next day, something else happened. A girl approached the awning, a young girl in a simple dress with a cloak covering her face. She entered quietly. She sat down in the corner. Mingyu looked at her for 3 seconds. The system displayed So-yeon, 19 years old, of noble birth, house of So, impoverished, concealing her identity, chronic malnutrition, high stress, loneliness, preferences, anything warm, anything made with care. Mingyu didn't approach her right away. He brewed some chamomile tea with honey, simple and warm, and set it in front of her. He placed 2 crackers next to it. She looked at the cup, at the crackers, at Mingyu. Then she quietly asked if there was work here. Mingyu said there was, washing dishes, cleaning, 5 coins a day and 3 cups. So Sean nodded. She said her name was Yuna, not Seo-hyun. Yuna. Mingyu knew that wasn't true. The system had shown him her real name, but he nodded and said he was glad to meet Yuna. Because if a person hides their name, it means they have a reason, and that reason is none of his business. Only one thing matters to him. This person needs a cup of something warm and a place to be. So-yeon started washing the dishes that same day. She washed them slowly, clumsily. She broke 1 cup, then another. Ha-yoon watched her with an expression of patient despair. Mingyu walked over to So-yeon and showed her the right way to hold a cup while washing it. Thumb on the inside, the other fingers on the outside. Rotate clockwise. The water should be warm, not hot. So-yeon listened with such seriousness, as if he were explaining the tactics for storming a fortress. On the 3rd day, she stopped breaking cups. By the 5th, she was washing them faster than Ha-yoon, and she also arranged the cups on the shelf differently, by color, by size, so that the eye would glide from a small, light-colored one to a large, dark. Mingyu looked at the shelf and paused. It was beautiful, not functional. Beautiful. He turned to So-yeon and told her she had a talent for design. So-yeon froze. She stood there with a rag in her hands, staring at him. Then she turned away and quickly walked behind the awning. Ha-yoon glanced at Mingyu and said she was crying. Mingyu nodded. He knew. He also knew why. Because in 19 years, no one had ever once told this girl that she had talent. They told her she had a dowry, or that she didn't have a dowry, or that she needed to get married. But no one had ever looked at what she was making with her hands and told her it was good. Mingyu waited. When So-yeon returned with red eyes, he told her that starting tomorrow, window display design and tableware arrangement would be her responsibility. She nodded. She didn't say a word, but that evening, after everyone had left, she lingered. She rearranged all the cups. She added a stone from the stream to the center of the shelf. She placed a sprig of mint next to it. In the morning, when Mingyu saw the shelf, he stood there for a minute, just looking at it. It wasn't just a display. It was art. Small, subtle, made of cups, stones, and mint. But art nonetheless. A line appeared before his eyes. Employee So-yeon. Level of craftsmanship. Spatial aesthetics. High. Impact. Customers spend 30% more time in the area designed by So-yeon. The average check increases by 20%. Mingyu smiled. 30% more time. 20% higher check. So-yeon had just boosted his income by arranging the cups beautifully. That evening, Mingyu sat by the campfire and thought. Ha-yoon handled the finances, Tae-hyun carried water, So-yeon decorated the space. Kang-mira kept watch. Old Bak showed them where the herbs grew. He had a team, a small one, not perfect, but a team. Everyone did what they knew how to do, everyone in their place, just like in a coffee shop. One brews, another washes dishes, a third works the register, a fourth smiles at the entrance. Mingyu brewed 5 cups, 1 for himself, 1 on a rock for his sister, 3 for those still sitting by the fire. Ha-yoon, Tae-hyun, So-yeon. They drank in silence. They stared at the fire. Mingyu thought about moon mint, 300 leaves, 20 a day. They'll run out in 15 days. He needs a steady supply. He'd have to go to Silver Hollow regularly, or find a way to grow moon mint here. He looked at the ground around the campfire. The soil was rocky, dry. Moon mint grew by the stream at the bottom of the hollow. Moisture, shade, silver stone. Could he recreate those conditions here? Could he grow it by the stream where he gets his water? Mingyu didn't know, but he knew who to ask. Tomorrow he would go to old Bach. Bach knew every plant in this forest. Maybe he also knew how to plant a new one. Bach said that moon mint doesn't grow on the surface. It never has. It needs a silver stone. It needs depth. It needs a shadow that's not like an ordinary shadow. The shadow of a ravine is the shadow of the earth, not the shadow of a tree. They're different things. Mingyu listened. Then he asked what the shadow of the earth meant. Bach looked at him for a long time. Then he said that the elders say there is light inside the earth. Faint. Cold. Light that comes not from the sun, but from the earth itself. Mana. In the hollows, this light is closer to the surface. That's why moon mint grows only there. Mingyu thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, he went to the stream where he used to fetch water. He examined the banks. The stones here were gray, not silver, but in one spot the stream bed led under a rocky overhang, a small niche, 1 meter deep, 1.5 meters wide. Eternal shadow. Dampness. Mingyu placed his hand on the rock. The rock was cold, but not just cold, a tingling sensation, just like back then at the bottom of Silver Hollow. Weaker, but it was there. He took a few roots of moon mint that he'd dug up in the hollow and brought with him. He planted them in a crevice beneath the ledge. He watered them with stream water. He covered them with soil. And he waited. While he waited, the world around him did not stand still. The month was drawing to a close. The camp at the Grey Fang Fault had grown. New detachments had arrived. The fault had deepened. The raids that used to last 3 days now lasted a week. The hunters returned exhausted, wounded, angry, and they all headed to the shelter with a cup and some steam. Mingyu worked 14 hours a day. Hayun worked 16, So Yan worked 12. Taehyun went to the stream 4 times a day instead of 2. There weren't enough hands. There weren't enough cups. There weren't enough herbs. Mingyu hired 2 more people. A porter named Ho Jin. A quiet guy, he hardly ever spoke, but his hands were those of a surgeon. Mingyu put him in charge of slicing the roots and grinding the herbs. Ho Jin cut with such precision that Mingyu once stopped and watched for 10 seconds. Every piece of fire root was the same thickness, millimeter for millimeter. The second was a woman, not young, stout, with the red hands of a laundress. Her name was Moon. Moon didn't know how to cook, she didn't know how to count, she didn't know how to arrange things beautifully, but she knew how to talk. To customers, to porters, to hunters. She remembered names. She remembered what each person had ordered last time. She remembered whose birthday it was. Mingyu put her at the entrance to greet and see off guests. Revenue didn't increase because of this, but customers started coming back more often. Because at the entrance, Moon would tell each person something like how glad she was to see them and that their favorite table was free. They had 3 tables, all identical, but after Moon's words, every customer considered one of them their own. At the end of the first month, 3 things happened. First, Mingyu signed his first 3 magic contracts with Jason, with Mira, with Garan. All 3 were from the Scarlet Copies. All 3 had been coming every day for 4 weeks now. The system issued a notification. Client Jason. 7 consecutive visits. Satisfaction consistently high. Regular customer magic contract available. Mingyu offered Jason the contract over evening tea. He explained it as best he could. He said it was something like a loyalty card, a discount, priority booking, and something else he didn't quite understand himself. Jae-seon looked at him and asked if there was a catch. Mingyu honestly said he didn't know. that the system was new and that he was figuring it out as he went along. Jason smiled. He held out his hand. A seal flashed on his palm, golden, warm, shaped like a steaming cup. Jason looked at the seal, then at Mingyu. He said that now he was definitely a regular customer. The same thing happened with Mira and Goran. 3 seals, 3 contracts, and Mingyu felt the difference. When he was brewing tea for Jason the next morning, he suddenly knew. He didn't see the system's code, he just knew. He knew that Jason needed barley today, not mint. He knew that the pain in his joints was worse today because there had been a fight with a poisonous creature during the night, and the poison had settled in his synovial fluid. He knew that a drop of sour wild berry juice needed to be added to the barley. It wasn't a recipe, it was understanding. 1% of Jason's combat experience was transferred to Mingyu through the contract, not as power, but as knowledge, as a sense of another's body, like an intuition about what this particular person needed right now. The second event, the Supply Guild inspector returned, not alone. He was accompanied by 2 others, large men, dressed as guild security guards. The inspector stepped under the awning with a different expression, not a weary traveler suffering from heartburn, an official with a document in his hands. He read the order aloud. All commercial operations in the Grey Fang Fault Zone are subject to licensing by the Supply Guild. Unlicensed establishments must be closed within 3 days. The penalty for non-compliance, 10 gold pieces. For a repeat violation, arrest and confiscation. Mingyu listened. Heyun stood nearby, her face impassive. So-yeon turned pale. Tae-hyun clenched his fists. Mingyu asked the inspector if it was possible to obtain a license. The inspector said that a license cost 10 gold pieces and took the guild 3 to 6 months to process. Mingyu understood. 10 gold pieces and half a year of waiting. During that time, his shop would be shut down 3 times. This wasn't licensing, it was a stranglehold. He looked at the inspector for 3 seconds. The system confirmed it. The same man, the same daughter. But today, there was a line next to his name that hadn't been there last time. He'd received an order from the regional head of the guild. He's afraid for his job. He's not acting of his own free will. Mingyu nodded. He said he understood, that he'd shut down the shop in 3 days. The inspector looked at him. For a second, something flashed in his eyes. Then he left with the security guards. Heyun turned to Mingyu and said he couldn't close the shop, that they had 70 customers a day, that people depended on this tea, that the red spears depended on it. Mingyu said he wasn't going to close. He was going to stop operating as an unlicensed shop. Heyun asked how. Mingyu said there was one way. An establishment isn't considered a commercial outlet if it's part of a hunting squad's supply chain. Every squad is entitled to its own cook and its own supplies. If Warm Steam became a field kitchen for the Red Spear squad rather than a commercial outlet, the guild would have no grounds to object. Heyun opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said it was brilliant, and that he needed Captain Reed's permission. Mingyu went to see Captain Reed that same evening. She was sitting by her tent, cleaning her sword. Mingyu sat down beside her. He explained the situation. The guild wants to shut it down. He needs protection, formal membership in the unit. He would be the field cook for the Red Spears, on paper. In reality, nothing would change. Captain Reed listened. Then she sheathed her sword. She looked at him. She said she didn't like formalities, that if he was to be a cook for the Red Spears, she wanted it to be for real. That her squad was heading into the Rift next week, a 7-day raid, and that she needed someone who would be able to cook broth by the 8th hour of battle. Mingyu looked at her, at the black spire behind her, at the entrance to the Rift where hunters went and from which not everyone returned. He's not a hunter, he's a barista. There are monsters inside the Rift. He doesn't know how to fight, but the captain didn't ask him to fight. She asked him to make broth. Mingyu said he agreed. The captain nodded. She took out a piece of paper. She wrote out an enrollment order. She signed it. She stamped it with the squad's seal. Mingyu looked at the paper. Field cook, Red Spears squad, S rank. By law, he was now part of an S rank squad. Porter number 47 had just become part of the elite, not with a sword, with a pot. The third event took place that night. Mingyu was checking the roots of the moon mint by the stream, the ones he'd planted 10 days ago. He expected to see dry, dead stalks, because Bak had said it didn't grow on the surface, but when he parted the soil, he saw them. 2 tiny sprouts. White, with thin blue veins, glowing. Moon mint was growing. Not in the ravine, by the stream, under a rocky overhang. In the shade of the earth. Mingyu crouched down and looked at the sprouts, 2 tiny leaves, the size of a fingernail, but they glowed. That changed everything. If he could grow moon mint, then he wouldn't need to go to Silver Hollow every month. He could grow it here, by every fault, by every stream, by every overhang. Mingyu stood up. He looked at the stars, then at the black spire, then at his hands, bandaged, calloused, with scraped skin, the hands of a barista that held the rope, hands that brewed tea at 68 degrees, hands that planted mint in stone. He walked back to camp. Tomorrow he had to prepare for the raid. For the first time in his life, he would enter a place where people are killed, not to kill, to feed those who kill, to protect. Mingyu brewed 2 cups. He drank one. He set the other on a rock. They entered the rift at dawn, 12 S-rank hunters and 1 cook with a mess kit. The entrance was an arch of black stone, 5 meters high. Inside, darkness, not ordinary darkness. Thick, as if the air had turned liquid and black. Mingyu brought up the rear. On his back was a bag of supplies, a pot, a thermos, small bags of herbs, a flask of water, barley groats, honey, salt, fire root, and 30 leaves of moon mint. That was all he had. When he crossed the threshold, the darkness closed in around him. The sounds of the camp vanished. The reddish sky vanished. There was only black stone. And light, faint, coming from cracks in the walls, pulsating, like veins. Mingyu had seen such light on the surface of the spire. But inside, it was stronger and warmer. The squad marched in silence, formation, Goran in the lead, shield and hammer. Behind him, the twins Han and Ho with swords on either side, Jae-seon in the center, Mira at the rear with her bow. Captain Reed brought up the rear of the combat group. Mingyu followed her. In the rear guard stood 5 more fighters who covered the rear and kept an eye on the cook. The first floor of the was a corridor, long, winding, walls of black stone with veins running through them. The ceiling was low. Goran walked crouched over. His hammer scraped against the wall. Mingyu counted his steps. 500, 1,000, 2,000. At the 3,000th step, the corridor opened into a hall. Huge. The ceiling was lost in the darkness. Stones lay on the floor. Something was moving among the stones. Mingyu didn't have time to make it out. Goran blocked his view. Captain Reed shouted an order. The formation closed ranks. Mingyu found himself in the center of a ring of 12 warriors. He stood and listened. The sounds of battle, blows, growls, the whistling of arrows, the clang of metal, the smell of blood, the smell of something sour and hot. Mingyu couldn't see what was happening. He could only see their backs, broad, armored, moving. 3 minutes. Silence. Goran turned around. Something black and wet on his hammer. He said one word, "Clear." The squad moved on. The second hall, the third, the fourth. The same procedure every time. A circle. A fight. Silence. Mingyu stood in the center and waited. 4 hours later, the captain called for a rest. They were on the 5th floor. The hall was empty. The walls here weren't black, but dark gray with a bluish tinge. Mingyu got to work. He found a level spot and arranged the stones in a ring. He started a fire with the oil sticks that Jae-seon had given him. There's no wood in the rift, no firewood, only oil sticks. They burn quickly. The heat is weak. Mingyu adapted. He set down the pot, poured in water, waited, counted the seconds. The temperature here was different. The air was denser. It was more humid. The water took longer to boil. Mingyu adjusted his calculations. The hunters sat around him. They took off their helmets. They wiped away the sweat. Jessian massaged his knee. Mira closed her eyes and leaned back against the wall. The twins sat shoulder to shoulder. Goran lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Mingyu brewed 12 cups, not all the same, a different one for each of them. The contracts with Jisun, Mira, and Goran were working. He could sense them. He knew that Jisun needed fire root for his joints after the fight. He knew that Mira needed sour berries for her eyes. He knew that Goran needed strong barley to lie down and sleep for 20 minutes. For the other 9, he used the system to read their needs, 3 seconds each. He served them in silence. A cup on a stone in front of each one, a cracker nearby, or a pinch of salt, or a drop of honey on a finger for those who had a sweet tooth. The hunters drank in silence. Inside the rift, the sounds were different, deeper. Mingyu heard someone sigh, someone quietly say that the tea was hot and that was good. Captain Reed drank last, as always. She took a sip, looked at Mingyu, said he was doing well. Mingyu nodded. The raid continued. Day 2, day 3, the 4th. Mingyu had gotten used to the rhythm. Battle. Rest, stop. Tea. Battle. Rest, stop. Broth. He'd learned to make broth from barley groats and salt using oil sticks. Thick, hot, nutritious. It tasted like liquid bread. The hunters ate greedily. The rations from the supply guild that they'd brought with them were standard. Hardtack, dried meat, water in canteens. At every rest stop, Mingyu added a cup of tea, or broth, or just hot water with honey and salt, a small thing. But after 4 hours of fighting in the dark among monsters, a small thing became everything. On the 5th day, it happened. They entered a hall on the 9th floor. The hall was much larger than the previous ones, and it wasn't empty. A creature stood in the center. Mingyu saw it over Goran's shoulder. It was huge, as tall as a 2-story building. 4 legs, 2 arms, armor made of black stone, red eyes, 6 eyes. All eyes were on the squad. The boss of the 9th floor. Captain Reed stepped forward. Her sword glowed white. Mana. She gave the order. Goran attacked first. A hammer blow to the creature's left leg. The sound was like a bell ringing. The creature roared. The twins struck from the flanks. Mira fired from above. Jason covered the flank. Mingyu stood in the rear guard with 5 fighters and watched. The battle lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of screams and blows and blood and sweat. Goran was struck by the tail and sent flying into the wall. He got up, he spat out blood, he went back into the fray. One of the twins, Ho, suffered a deep cut on his arm. Mira had shot all her arrows and switched to a short knife. Captain Reed fought one-on-one with the creature. Her sword sliced through the armor. Chunks of black stone flew in all directions. Mingyu stood there counting. 2 hours of battle. The energy expenditure was colossal. The mana expenditure was colossal. When they finished, if they finished, they would need to recover quickly. He began to prepare, right in the middle of the battle. In the corner of the hall, he lit a fire, set a pot on it, poured in water. Barley broth. Thick, lots of salt, lots of fire root, for energy, for warmth, for the body. In a second pot, moon mint. 68 degrees, for mana, for the mind, for the captain. The battle ended when Captain Reed plunged her sword into the creature's central eye. The beast collapsed. The floor shook. Silence. 12 hunters stood in the hall, all alive, 3 wounded. Goran sat down on the floor. Ho pressed his hand to his chest. Jason was limping. Captain Reed stood over the creature's body, sword in hand. Her shoulders rose and fell, heavy breathing. Mingyu emerged from the corner with a pot. Silently, he made his way around the squad. He handed a bowl of broth to each of them, hot and thick, to anyone who could drink. For Goran, he added a double portion of fire root to the broth. He bandaged Ho's arm with a rag soaked in moon mint infusion. Not a potion, just a wet rag with mint. But Ho said the pain was gone. Mingyu approached Captain Reed last. She was standing there, staring into space. Her mana was completely depleted. Mingyu placed a bowl in front of her. Moon mint, 1 cup. She looked at the bowl, looked at him, took it, drank it, standing up in 1 gulp. Then she closed her eyes. 10 seconds. When she opened them, her gaze was clear again. She looked at Mingyu and said that he was worth more than the fifth fighter. Mingyu shook his head. He said that the 5th fighter was beating the monster. He was making broth. Those were different things. The captain said no, that without his broth and tea at the 6-hour mark of the battle, Goran wouldn't have gotten back up after being struck by the tail. That without his mint, she wouldn't have been able to concentrate her mana for the final blow. That the battle lasted 2 hours instead of the usual 4 because the squad went into it well-fed and well-rested after his impromptu tea breaks. Mingyu remained silent. He didn't know what to say. The captain didn't expect an answer. She turned to the squad and announced that the raid was over, that the boss of the 9th floor had been defeated, that they were returning. The return trip took a day. When the squad emerged from the rift onto the surface, Mingyu saw the reddish sky and stopped. He stood there, breathing. The air smelled of the forest, smoke, and wind. Not blood, not stone, not monsters. He stood there, gazing at the sky, and thought that the most beautiful sunset is the one you see after not having seen the sky for 5 days. Hayun was waiting for him at the warm steam shelter. She stood at the entrance with her arms crossed. Mingyu approached. She looked at him, at his dirty face, at his bandaged hands, at the mess kit on his back. She said that the take-home pay for the 5 days he'd been away totaled 3 gold and 80 silver. That Soyin had finished putting together the new menu. That Moon had greeted 47 customers by name. That Hojin had chopped enough roots to last 3 days, and that she was glad he was alive. She said the last part more quietly. Mingyu looked at her. He nodded. He said he was glad too. Then he sat down at his table. He brewed some tea, gray forest mint, plain, no moon tea, no fire root, just mint and water. He set it in front of him, took a sip, closed his eyes. He was home, not in Seoul, here. Under the awning with the crooked sign, with 3 tables, with a shelf that So Yeon had decorated with stones from the stream, with Ha-Yoon's notebook on the edge of the table, with Moon, who was already shouting to someone that a seat was open. Come on in, here. Mingyu opened his eyes. He set a 2nd cup on the stone for his sister and went to work. After the raid on the rift, everything changed. Not for Mingyu, for the camp. The story of the cook who made broth during the 8th hour of the battle with the 9th floor boss spread like wildfire in 2 days. Hunters from other squads came to the awning and asked if it was true that the S-rank squad had brought a porter with a cauldron. Was it true that Captain Reed drank his tea before the final blow? Was it true that he applied a wet cloth with herbs to a wounded swordsman and the pain went away? Mingyu didn't answer. He brewed tea. He served it. He remained silent. But his silence spoke louder than any words. People filled in the blanks themselves, and what they imagined was more than the truth. A week later, the captain of another squad came to the shelter. B rank, the Iron Boar squad. 20 men. The captain was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and a hoarse voice. He said his squad was leaving for the rift in 3 days, a 10-day raid. He asked if Mingyu could supply them with provisions, not the guild's standard rations, but his own provisions. His tea, his broth, his honeyed crackers. Mingyu looked at him for 3 seconds. The system displayed Captain Nam Gon-woo, 46 years old, chronic back pain, 3 soldiers lost in the last year, guilt, drinks in the evenings, sleeps poorly, likes simple food. Mingyu said he could help, but he wouldn't go inside with them. He's alone. There are many squads. He can't be inside every rift, but he can give them something to take with them. Thermoses of broth, bags of herbs for brewing, instructions. Which herb? What temperature? How long? Captain Nam asked how much. Mingyu named his price. 5 gold pieces for a full 10-day supply for 20 people. The captain grimaced. Then he nodded. 5 gold pieces to ensure his men ate hot meals for 10 days straight instead of hardtack and jerky. This wasn't a purchase, it was an investment in survival. Hyun sat in the corner taking notes. When the captain left, she looked at Mingyu and said this was a new model, not retail sales by the cup, wholesale delivery in sets. Mingyu nodded. He'd been thinking about this ever since returning from the rift. He couldn't be everywhere, but his tea could, if he taught people how to brew it properly, if he prepared sets with precise instructions, if he paused, looked at Hyun, said he needed more people, more herbs, more kettles, more space. Hyun opened her notebook. She turned the page. She began to write out a plan. A month later, the warm steam shed had expanded once again. Now it wasn't just a shed, it was a wooden structure, 2 rooms, the front one for customers, the back one for storage and preparation. Hyun hired 4 more people, 2 to gather herbs, 1 to deliver water from the hot spring in the east. Taehyun had found it a month ago. The mineral water enhanced the effects of the herbal infusions, and 1 young woman to package the sets for the units. So-yeon decorated the new space. She whitewashed the walls. On the shelves, she arranged clay pots filled with dried herbs. Above the entrance, she hung a branch with blue leaves from the gray forest. Inside, it smelled of mint and honey and warm wood. A hunter who entered after 10 o'clock in the rift would freeze on the threshold, because inside it felt like a home, a real home, one that most hunters hadn't had in years. Over the past month, Mingyu had signed 4 more magic contracts, with Captain Reed, with Kang Mira, with Kim Jieho, and with Bok, old Bok, who had been coming every morning for his cup of tea for 2 months now. The contract with Bok surprised Mingyu. Bok wasn't a hunter, Bok was a porter, old, sick, without rank, without combat experience. But when the seal flashed on his wrinkled palm, Mingyu received a new line from the system, a contract with the porter back, transfer of experience, not combat experience, knowledge of plants, knowledge of the soil, knowledge of the weather. Bok had lived for 40 years among the faults. He knew every stone, every bush, every trail. His knowledge wasn't in swords, it was in the earth. And now Mingyu could feel that earth. He'd walk out to the stream and know that it would rain in 3 days. He'd look at the sky and know that the wind would shift by evening. He'd touch the soil and know where the water was closest to the surface. The old man's knowledge flowed through the contract like warm tea down his throat, quietly, deeply. 2 months. Warm Steam's net profit totaled 27 gold pieces. Hyun read out the results that evening by candlelight. Mingyu listened and did the math in his head. 27 gold pieces in 2 months. In Seoul, his side job brought in 500,000 won a month net, about $400. Here, he was earning many times more, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the people. Over the course of 2 months, more than 400 people had passed through his establishment. 400 cups, 400 faces, 400 stories. He remembered every face, every taste, every line from the system. The next morning, a carriage pulled up to Warm Steam, black, varnished, with a crest on the door. A man stepped out of the carriage. Mingyu looked at him and froze, fat, dressed in silk. With impeccable manners, with dead eyes, the system displayed a line of text. Hwang Ki-do, 58 years old, head of the Supply Guild, regional control, 17 faults, annual turnover, 400,000 gold pieces, health, excellent, mental state, cold, preferences, undefined. The system had nothing to calculate because this man wanted nothing. He hadn't come for tea, he had come for Mingyu. Hwang Ki-do sat down at the table. He placed his hands on his knees. He looked around, at the walls, at the shelves, at the cups, at So-yeon, who stood frozen by the shelf, at Hyun, who stood there with a notebook and pale knuckles. Then he looked at Mingyu, and he spoke. His voice was soft, calm, like silk. He said he was impressed. that turning a pile of sacks into a retail outlet serving S-rank squads in just 2 months was a talent, that he valued people like that the supply guild was ready to offer a partnership. Mingyu listened. Huan continued. A partnership meant a license, protection, access to trade routes, warehouses, suppliers. Everything Mingyu had been building piece by piece over 2 months, the guild could provide in a single day. In exchange, 60% of the profits, control over the menu, and the guild's right to shut down the establishment at any time without explanation. Mingyu looked at Huan. Huan was smiling. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Mingyu said he was grateful for the offer, and that the answer was no. Huan's expression didn't change. He nodded. He stood up. He said it was a shame, that he'd hoped Mingyu would prove to be smarter. And he left. His carriage drove away. The dust settled. Hayun turned to Mingyu. Her hands were shaking. She said he'd just turned down the richest man on the continent. Mingyu said he'd turned down a man who wanted to take 60% of his tea. Hayun said that Huang Qido doesn't take no for an answer. Mingyu looked at her and said that now he does. He didn't yet know just how wrong he was. The repercussions began 3 days later. The first blow came from the water supplier. It was the father of the boy whom Mingyu had been giving free tea to all winter. The man arrived in the morning, his face ashen. He said he could no longer deliver water. He'd been offered a contract with the guild, a good contract with an advance payment. If he refused, his well would be confiscated for non-payment of a land tax he'd never even heard of. Mingyu looked at him. He looked at the boy standing behind his father, staring at the ground. He said he understood, that he held no grudge, that the boy could come for tea just as before. The supplier left. He didn't look up. The second blow came from the competitors. The next day, 3 new tents appeared next to warm steam, identical, with identical signs. Hot tea. Price, 2 copper coins. Half the price of what Mingyu charged the porters. The tea in these stalls was the same as at the guild station, boiling water with crushed leaves, but it cost 2 copper coins, and people came, not everyone, but some, those for whom price mattered more than quality. Mingyu didn't lower his prices. Hayun asked why. Mingyu said that if he lowered the price, he'd be admitting that his tea was worth no more than boiling water with dead leaves. But his tea was worth more, because it's brewed for a specific person, because every cup involves 3 seconds of reading, the exact temperature and the right timing. It's not a commodity, it's care, and care can't cost 2 copper coins. Hayun looked at him and said that care doesn't pay for barley groats. Mingyu smiled. She was right. But so was he. The third blow came at night. Mingyu woke up to the smell of smoke. He bolted out of the building. The back wall was on fire. Taehyun was already outside, hauling water. Soyeon was carrying out sacks of herbs. Hayun stood there with a wet rag, beating at the flames. They put it out in 20 minutes. The back wall was charred. Their honey supplies were ruined. 2 sacks of chamomile had burned up. The pot had melted. Mingyu sat on the ground, staring at the blackened wall. Soyeon was crying, quietly, with her face buried in her hands. Taehyun stood nearby, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Hayun wasn't crying. She stood there, looking at Mingyu, waiting. Mingyu stood up. He surveyed the damage, the wall, honey, chamomile, the pot. Everything can be repaired. They have money. They have time, but next time could be worse. Next time it might not be a wall. Next time it might be a person. Captain Reed arrived in the morning. She looked at the wall. Her face turned to stone. She said she'd post a guard. 2 shifts, 4 fighters, S rank. Mingyu said he couldn't ask S rank hunters to guard the tea house. The captain looked at him and said she wasn't asking for his opinion. Her squad had decided. Warm steam was their place, the only place in this camp where they didn't have to be hunters. Whoever touched that place would touch them. Mingyu looked at her, at the scar across her entire face, At her gray eyes, at the shoulders that bore the responsibility for 12 lives every day. She didn't do it out of a sense of duty. She did it because in that tea house she'd slept without a migraine for the first time in 7 years. Mingyu nodded. He accepted it. A week later, the wall was repaired, supplies were restocked, a guard was posted, the competitors continued to sell their tea for 2 copper coins, but fewer and fewer people went to them, because boiling water is boiling water, and Mingyu is Mingyu. 2 weeks later, one of the competitors came to see him at night, quietly, unarmed. Mingyu wasn't asleep, he was sitting there brewing tea. The competitor sat down across from him, a young guy, about 20 years old. He said the guild had hired him, that they'd paid him 3 gold pieces to set up shop nearby and poach customers, that the tea he was selling made him sick, that he wanted to quit but was afraid. Mingyu poured him a cup. The real thing, mint with honey. The young man took a sip and fell silent for a long time. Then he asked if Mingyu had any work for him. Mingyu asked what he was good at. The young man said he could count quickly and without making mistakes. Mingyu looked at Hayun, who had fallen asleep over her notebook. She needed an assistant. He told the young man there was a position available. His name was Yunch Ho. He became the second accountant at Warm Steam. A month after the arson, Mingyu made a decision. He was sitting with Hayun that evening, looking at the map Kim Jaho had drawn. All 17 faults of the continent were marked on the map. Mingyu circled them. Then he drew lines between them, trade routes, caravan routes, and river routes. Hayun looked at the map. Mingyu said that a single shelter at a single fault was a vulnerability. If the guild burned it down, it would all be over. But if there were 2 shelters, or 5, or 17, then, to destroy Warm Steam, 17 locations would have to be burned down simultaneously, and 17 locations meant 17 S-rank guard posts. Hayun looked at him and said that was war. Mingyu shook his head. He said it was expansion. War is when you want to destroy someone else. Expansion is when you want more people to drink hot beverages. The next day, he began preparing to open a second branch. At the Rift, in Ash Valley, the second branch opened 3 weeks later. At the Ash Valley Fault, Mingyu rode there himself. On horseback, he was a poor rider, very poor. The horse sensed his uncertainty and went wherever it pleased. Joseon from the Red Spears rode with him as a bodyguard. He laughed the whole way. He said he'd seen many terrifying things in the rifts, but Mingyu on a horse was the scariest of them all. Ash Valley was different. A gray landscape, ash-covered soil. Trees were sparse, short, like twisted fingers sprouting from the ground. The rift here was not a peak, but a depression, a black hole in the ground 100 meters in diameter. The camp surrounding it was larger than the one at Grey Fang. 5,000 people, 10 detachments, hundreds of porters, and a single guild supply post exactly the same. Gray mush, murky soup, stale tea. Mingyu found a spot. He rented an empty tent from a retired hunter for 2 silver coins a week. He set up a table. He hung up a sign. A cup of steam. Warm Steam. Branch 2. He needed someone who would stay here and run the business. Mingyu couldn't be in 2 places at once, and then he remembered. Gabrielle Morvan, a spice trader from the southern continent. The system had mentioned her 3 weeks ago when Mingyu signed a contract with a caravan driver transporting salt. The entry read, "Trade route through the Valley of Ashes. Gabriel Morvan's caravan will pass through here in 2 weeks. Spices, cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, pepper, dried fruit." Mingyu waited. On the 3rd day in the Valley of Ashes, the caravan arrived. 3 wagons, 6 camels, 3 guards, and her, dark-skinned, wearing silk harem pants, with gold earrings, with a long pipe from which sweet smoke scented with cloves rose. Gabrielle Morvan, 27 years old. 10 years on the trade routes. Mingyu looked at her for 3 seconds. The system displayed a long list of traits. Physically healthy, mentally sharp, deep loneliness hidden behind cynicism. 10 years without a partner she respects, loves strong hot drinks with spices, can't stand flattery, values intelligence over strength. Mingyu walked over her cart. He introduced himself. He said he wanted to buy cinnamon. Gabrielle looked him up and down. From the cart, she said cinnamon costs 2 gold pieces per pound. Mingyu said that was expensive, that in the capital cinnamon costs 1 gold piece. Since the caravan passes through the capital, she must have bought it there. A 100% markup for delivery. But delivery here takes 3 days, so a fair price would be 1 gold piece and 20 silver pieces. Gabrielle looked at him a different way. She climbed down from the cart. She came closer. She said 1.5 gold coins. Mingyu said 1 gold coin and 30 silver coins. Gabrielle said 1 gold coin and 40. Mingyu said 1 gold coin and 35. But not with money, barter. Tea in exchange for the difference. Gabrielle narrowed her eyes. She asked what kind of tea it was. Mingyu took some moon mint leaves out of his bag. He brewed it right in front of her, in a camping kettle, over coals, 68 degrees, 45 seconds. He poured it. He handed it to her. Gabrielle took the cup. She sniffed it. She looked at the color. She took a sip. Mingyu saw her eyes widen. How she took a second sip. A third. How she set down the cup and looked at him with an expression he recognized. It was the expression of a merchant who realized he'd stumbled upon something more valuable than gold. She said it wasn't tea. Mingyu said it was tea. She said that if this was tea, then all the potions she'd seen over the past 10 years on the road were trash. Mingyu remained silent. Gabrielle was silent too. Then she sat down on a rock. She lit her pipe. She looked at him for a long time through the smoke. Then she said that 1 gold and 35 silver would suit her, and that she wanted an exclusive contract to supply spices for his tea house, and that she would stay in Ash Valley for a month. Mingyu asked why. Gabrielle exhaled a puff of smoke. She said she wanted to see how he worked, because in 10 years on the road, she'd seen 1,000 merchants, but not a single one who haggled worse than she did and brewed better than anyone. Gabrielle stayed, and not just for a month. On the 3rd day, she started giving advice. On the 5th, she reorganized the herb storage system. On the 7th, she drew up a map of trade routes between the 17 rifts, indicating the delivery cost for each one. On the 10th day, Mingao offered her a position, Director of Logistics and External Supplies. Gabrielle laughed. She said that in 10 years, no one had ever offered her a job, only goods or a place in bed. Mingao said he needed her brain, not her goods. Gabrielle stopped laughing. She looked at him seriously. Then she held out her hand. They shook hands. That evening, Mingao made her some tea, with her own cinnamon, brewed just right, 65 degrees, 20 seconds. The cinnamon had unfurled, not bitter, not burning, honey sweet, warm, like an embrace from within. Gabrielle sipped and remained silent. Then she said that in 27 years, this was the first time anyone had brewed her own cinnamon better than she had. Mingyu said the cinnamon was good. It just needed to be brewed, not boiled. Gabrielle looked at him and said he was a dangerous man. Mingyu didn't understand, she explained. She said that swordsmen are dangerous with their swords, mages are dangerous with their spells, but he is dangerous because he makes people happy, and that the people he's made happy will follow him anywhere. Mingyu wanted to object, but he remained silent because he looked around and saw Ha-yun at the first branch was managing his finances and staying up until 3 in the morning. So-yeon arranges the cups in the dark after her shift because she wants everything to look beautiful in the morning. Tai-hyun walks to the stream 4 times a day, over rocks, through mud, and through snow. Kang Mira sleeps at the entrance with her sword. Goran stands guard at night. Captain Reed writes him letters of recommendation to the commanders of other units. All these people do what they do not for money, not for tea, but because he sees them, each one, for 3 seconds, and brews a special cup for each of them. Gabrielle was right. It was dangerous. Because if you made people happy and then disappeared, they would become unhappier than they were before you came along. Mingyu poured 2 cups, one for himself, one on the stone. For his sister. Gabriel looked at the second cup. She asked who it was for. Mingyu said it was for someone far away. Gabrielle didn't ask any further. She simply lit her pipe and sat silently beside him while the tea cooled. A year had passed. 12 branches. Official registration of the House of Warm Steam trademark. 73 employees. 420 regular customers with magic contracts. A team that Mingyu hadn't planned for and couldn't have imagined a year ago. Hayun sat in the main office in his first shed near Greifang and managed the entire financial system. So Yun traveled to all 12 branches and set each one up so that hunters would stop at the threshold and forget how tired they were. Gabriel had laid out caravan routes connecting all the locations, spices, herbs, honey, barley, everything was moving, everything was working. Tai Hyun became head of water supply. He had 10 water carriers, each knew his own stream, his own spring, his own route. Moon worked at the entrance to the main branch and knew each of the 420 customers by name. Kang Mi-ra became the head of security for all branches. She had 20 volunteer fighters, hunters ranging from D to A rank, who stood guard at the tea houses for free because they considered it an honor. And Li Sua. She had appeared 3 months ago, a 17-year-old A rank hunter, a prodigy, 2 swords, a reputation as a little demon. She walked into the tea house for the first time in full combat gear, arrogant, loud. She demanded the very best tea and said that if she didn't like it, she'd tear this shack to pieces. Min Gyu looked at her for 3 seconds. The system displayed Li Sua, 17 years old, A rank, social pressure, fear of failure, longing for her grandmother, who died 2 years ago. Her grandmother used to grow peaches. Sua loves sweets but is too shy to buy them in front of her squad because little demons don't eat pastries. Mingyu nodded. He went behind the counter. He returned with a small plate. On the plate lay a peach pie. He'd baked it that morning using the dried peaches Gabriel had brought. The crust was crumbly. The filling was sweet with a hint of tartness. The top was golden brown. He set it in front of Sua. Next to it was a cup of tea, light, peach-flavored, with a drop of honey. Sua looked at the plate, at the pie, at the peach filling. Her expression changed. Her arrogance was gone. All that remained was a 17-year-old girl looking at the pie and remembering her grandmother's garden. She picked up the pie, took a bite, chewed slowly. Mingyu saw her eyes well up. She didn't cry. She was Li Sua. A little demon doesn't cry in tea houses, but she ate the pie down to the last crumb and quietly asked if she could come back again. Mingyu said there was always a table for her, in the corner, behind the screen, where no one would see the little demon eating pastries. Sua blushed. She said he was cheeky, and that she hated him. And she came the next day, and the day after that, and a month later she had her own table, and Mingyu always had peach pie ready for her. A year, 12 branches, and the supply guild wouldn't give up. Huang Qido shifted from sabotage to politics. He filed a petition with the royal court. The charges were serious: illegal commercial activity, undermining the guild system, attempting to undermine the crown's monopoly. The sentence, if the court agreed, confiscation of all property. Hard labor for Mingyu. Closure of all branches. Mingyu found out about the trial 3 days later. Hayun rushed into the tea house with a piece of paper in her hands. Her face was pale, her voice was steady. She read out the charges. Then she placed the paper on the table, and she said that this was the end. Mingyu looked at the paper. He read it. He looked at Hayun, at Soyeon, who was standing by the shelf, clutching a cup to her chest, at Tai Hyun, who stood frozen in the doorway. At Gabriel, who was smoking a pipe and staring at him without blinking. Mingyu said he would go to trial. Hayun said he needed a lawyer, a defense attorney, someone from the nobility, someone with clout. Mingyu shook his head. He said he would go alone, wearing an apron, carrying a teapot. Gabriel exhaled smoke and said he was either a genius or a suicide. Mingyu said he was a barista. The Capitol Square in front of the Royal Court building. Morning. The sun was shining. Mingyu stood alone. wearing a simple apron, stained with tea leaves. His hair was tied back, his hands were calloused. In front of him were marble steps, above, columns. Behind the columns, doors. Behind the doors, the people who would decide his fate. He climbed the steps. He entered. The courtroom was enormous. High ceilings, stone benches, representatives of the supply guild sat on the prosecution benches. 3 noble houses. The royal prosecutor in a black robe. Huan Kidu sat in the front row. Calm, confident, with dead eyes. Min Gyu walked to the defendant's bench. He placed a small folding table on the bench, the very one he'd been carrying since day 1. A board on 2 legs. He took a teapot out of his bag, a small one, clay, the one he'd bought from a potter in the village for 3 copper coins. He took out a cup, just one, set it down beside the teapot. He took out a flask of water, moon mint leaves. The judge looked down at him from above. The prosecutor watched. Huang Qidu watched. Mingyu poured water into the teapot. He placed it on a small oil burner. He waited. Silence filled the hall. Everyone watched as the porter in an apron boiled water in the royal court. The prosecutor cleared his throat. He began to read the charges. Mingyu listened and kept an eye on the temperature. 60, 65, 68. He took it off the heat. He dropped in a leaf. 45 seconds. The prosecutor read on. Mingyu brewed the tea. When the prosecutor finished, Mingyu poured a cup. He raised it. And then people entered from all 4 sides of the square. The courtroom doors opened. Captain Alex Reed entered first, in full armor, a scar across her face, 12 Red Spears fighters behind her. Behind her was Li Sua, 2 swords at her belt, her eyes ablaze. Behind her was another S-rank captain, and another, and another. 11 captains of S-rank units from across the continent, each with their own unit. Behind them were hundreds of porters. Tae Hyun led the way. Behind them was Madame Yoon. Mingyu had met her 4 months ago when he opened a branch in the capital. She came with her entire inn's staff. Behind them is Gabriel with his caravan drivers. Behind them is So-yeon, without a cloak, her face uncovered, the youngest daughter of the So family, a noblewoman, a dishwasher, a designer. Behind them is Ha-yun, with a notebook in her hands, standing up straight, with dry eyes. Behind them was Old Back. He could barely walk, but he walked. Behind them was Kang Mi-ra with a sword. Behind them was Yoon Ji-ho, a former rival. Behind them was Ho-jin, the silent root carver. Behind them was Moon, who remembered 420 names. Behind them was a boy whose father delivered water. Behind them was the princess of the kingdom. On foot, without an entourage, in a simple dress. Behind them was an old beggar to whom Mingyu had given his last piece of dry bread a year ago at Grey Feng's. The hall was packed. The square in front of the hall was packed. People stood on the steps, on the street, in the alleys. No one said a word. Everyone just stood there. Mingyu looked at them, at everyone, at every face, at every person to whom he had once poured a cup. He turned to the prosecutor. He held out a cup to him, hot, steaming, and he said that while the prosecutor was making up his mind, he should try some. Hot! The prosecutor looked at the cup. He looked at the hall full of people. He looked at the 11 S-rank squads standing in silence, with cups in their hands, their own cups, the ones they'd brought with them. The prosecutor took the cup. His hands were shaking. He took a sip, set it down, looked at Huan Qido. Huan sat motionless. His expression hadn't changed, but Mingyu saw it. 3 seconds. The system showed it. For the first time in 2 years, the system was able to read Huan Qido, because for the first time in 2 years, something alive had appeared within him. Confusion. The prosecutor announced, "The case is dismissed due to lack of evidence." Silence. Then a sound. Not applause. Not a shout. A ringing. Hundreds of people raised their cups and tapped them with their fingers, the quiet clinking of clay, like a bell. Like that little bell on the door of a coffee shop in Seoul that would ring when a customer walked in. After the trial, Huang Qido didn't show up for 2 weeks. Mingyu didn't celebrate the victory. He knew that the trial wasn't the end. It was a period, in the middle of a sentence, not at the end. 2 weeks later, Mingyu received a letter, no signature, no seal, on expensive paper, 1 line. I invite you to dinner, an address. Mingyu recognized the handwriting. Hayun told him not to go. Gabriel told him not to go. Captain Reed said that if he went, she would go with him. Mingyu said he would go alone. He took one thing with him, a mess kit. Huang Qidu's house stood on a hill in the capital, large, stone, with a garden. The servants led Mingyu into the dining room. A long table made of dark wood, 12 chairs, silver tableware, crystal glasses, candles. Huang sat at the head of the table, alone. Mingyu sat across from him. He set the mess kit on the table. Huang looked at the mess kit, then at Mingyu. He was silent. Mingyu was silent too. A minute, 2. Then Huang spoke. He said he had lost. That for the first time in 30 years, someone had beaten him, not with money or force, but with bowls. He said he didn't understand, that for 300 years his family had fed hunters, and no one had ever complained. Why now? Why him? Mingyu listened. Then he said one thing. He said that Huan had fed the hunters, but he hadn't fed people. A hunter is a rank. A person is someone who wants something hot after a fight. Huan gave them calories. Mingyu gave them care. The difference isn't in the menu. The difference is in why you put a plate on the table. Huan was silent. Mingyu looked at him for 3 seconds. The system revealed him for the first time in full. Huang Qidu, 58 years old, chronic emptiness, 30 years without real food. He eats only symbols, status symbol dishes, expensive wines, rare delicacies. None of them had been prepared for him. All had been prepared for the position, for the title, for the seat at the head of the table. The last time someone had truly cooked for him was 43 years ago. Nanny, rice broth with salted plums. Mingyu stood up. He picked up the pot. He asked the servant for access to the kitchen. The servant looked at Huan. Huan nodded. Mingyu entered the kitchen. It was enormous. Copper pots, marble tables, 10 cooks who froze at the sight of a man in an apron holding a dented pot. Mingyu found the rice, found the water, found the salt, found the salted plums in a clay pot on the bottom shelf, an old pot, dusty. It must have been sitting there for a long time. Apparently, no one had cooked with it because salted plums are food for nannies and peasants, not for Master Huan. Mingyu rinsed the rice. He poured water over it. He put the pot on the stove. Slow, low heat. The rice had to simmer until it reached the consistency of silk. This isn't porridge. It's a broth, liquid, warm, so thin that a spoon stands upright, but barely. 40 minutes. Mingyu stood by the stove and stirred. The cooks watched. He paid no attention. When the rice was cooked, he took the pot off the heat. He added a pinch of salt. He placed a single salted plum on top, a red one, a small one, wrinkled. He poured it into a plain earthenware bowl, not a silver plate, not crystal. Into the earthenware bowl he'd brought with him in the pot. He returned to the dining room. He set the bowl in front of Huan. He sat down. Huan stared at the bowl, at the rice water, at the salted plum, at the earthenware bowl. His face was expressionless. 10 seconds, 20, then he picked up a spoon, a silver one. He looked at it, put it back down. He lifted the bowl with both hands, the way children do, the way old people do, the way those do who don't need a spoon because the food is such that they want to hold it close. He took a sip. Mingyu watched. Huan drank the rice broth, slowly, sip by sip. A salty plum remained at the bottom. He finished the liquid. He picked up the plum with his fingers, put it in his mouth, chewed. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at Mingyu. Somewhere inside, somewhere in the past, 43 years ago, to a kitchen that's long gone, to a woman who's long gone, to a boy who's long gone. He set down the empty bowl down. He dropped the spoon. It clattered against the table. Huang Qidu sat, motionless, for 10 minutes. Mingyu sat across from him and said nothing. Then Huang stood up. He didn't look at Mingyu. He walked out. The door closed. Mingyu sat alone in the vast dining hall. Candles burned, silver gleamed. The clay bowl stood empty. The next day, the Supply Guild withdrew all claims against the House of Warm Steam. All of them, without exception, without conditions. Huang Qidu did not repent. He didn't become a good person. He simply remembered why people eat in the first place. A second year passed. All 17 rifts were covered with branches. Mingyu no longer stood behind every counter. He taught. He opened the first Academy of Service, a small one, 20 students, former porters, former dishwashers, former people whom no one considered human. He taught them how to brew. Not from recipes. They memorized the recipes themselves. He taught them to look, for 3 seconds, at the person across from them, to see not their rank, nor their armor, nor their wallet, to see their fatigue, their pain, their longing, their hunger, and to brew for that specific person. At the end of the second year, Mingyu found a note in the ruins of an old building near the White Crown Fault. The building was abandoned, stone walls, a collapsed roof, inside, a counter, decayed, shelves, empty, and words scratched into the wall. In a language Mingyu didn't know, the system translated it. Whoever you are, if you're reading this, don't give up. People are good, it's just that no one ever poured them anything warm. Mingyu stood in the ruins and read. He reread it. He traced the letters with his fingers. Someone had been here before him. Someone had tried to do the same thing and failed. The system displayed a line. Predecessor, a baker from a distant land, 400 years ago, killed by the guild's mercenaries. His bakery stood for 3 years. His bread is still remembered in local legends. He called his bakery Warm House. Mingyu sat down on the floor of the ruins. He sat there for a long time. Then he stood up. He went outside, and he began to build, right there, a new branch. The 17th, the last one. The system displayed another line. Ancient service system. Status. 17% activated. To complete the reboot, service points at all 17 faults must be activated. All 17 are activated. Condition met. The reboot will begin when the operator is ready. Mingyu read it, reread it, reboot, service system, ancient, dying. The one who summoned him, the one who took him from Seoul with a thermos in her hand. He stood amid the ruins and understood. The faults are not a natural phenomenon. They are the remnants of this system. They grow and deepen because the system is dying. And to stop this, it wasn't necessary to kill the boss on the top floor. It was necessary to open the 17 tea shops. Saving the world isn't a final battle. It's 17 counters behind which people stand, pouring warm tea. The third year. Winter. Mingyu sat in his little room above the first tea shop by the Grey Fang Fault. A small room, one window, a bed, a table, a teapot on the table, 2 cups, one for him, one for his sister, just like every evening, just like 1,000 evenings before. Snow was falling outside, quiet, heavy. Beyond the window, the lights of 17 tea houses were burning. Not all of them were visible from here, but Mingyu knew they were burning because he could feel it, through the contracts, through the system, through the thin threads that connected him to every person for whom he had ever poured a cup of tea. 420 contracts, 420 people. Every evening he felt them, a faint hum at the edge of his consciousness, like a pulse. Like the breath of a sleeping house. Jaseon is massaging his knee by the fireplace. Mira is reading a letter from her family. Goran is sleeping. For the first time in 3 years, he's sleeping without nightmares. Captain Reed is standing on the wall, looking at the stars. Without a migraine, his 3rd year without a migraine. Su Ah is eating peach pie behind the screen and thinking that no one can see her. Ha Yun sits over her notebook and counts. She's always counting. She probably even counts in her sleep. So Yan arranges flowers at the new branch and smiles. She smiles now. Gabrielle smokes a pipe on the roof of the trailer and gazes at the moon. Madame Yoon tucks her daughter in and sings her a song. Tae-hyun is carrying water and feels no pain in his back. Bak is sitting by the fire, warming his hands. Old hands. Warm. Min-gyu could sense them all. And he knew he was ready. He stood up, went downstairs, stepped out of the tea house. Snow fell on his shoulders. He walked toward the rift, toward the black spire. It stood as always, humming, pulsing, but quieter than before, weaker. The system was dying, slowly, a little more each day, and every day the fissures grew a little deeper, a little more dangerous, a little closer to devouring the world. Min-gyu stood before the entrance. He placed his palm on the black stone. The stone was warm, like a cup of tea. The system displayed a message. Operator ready, begin reboot, condition, sincerity of intent. Min-gyu closed his eyes. Sincerity of intent. He thought about why he was doing all this. Not for money, not for fame, not to save the world. He was doing it because at 3 a.m. in Seoul he'd carried a thermos of oolong tea to his sister, because that's just how he is. Because when there's a person in front of you who's suffering and you're holding something hot in your hands, the distance between those two facts is just 3 steps. And he always took those 3 steps. The system accepted the answer. The stone beneath his palm flared up, not with fire, with light, warm, golden, like the lines that had appeared before his eyes on the first day. The light traveled along the cracks in the spire, up, down, deep inside. The earth hummed. It wasn't scary, like a distant bell. Min-gyu stood with his palm on the stone and felt it. 17 spires across the continent lit up simultaneously, 17 tea houses at the 17 faults, 17 service points, 17 places where, right now, someone is pouring hot tea for someone else. The service system sighed, like a person who hadn't breathed for a long time, and it began to work. The faults didn't disappear. They didn't close. They didn't snap shut. They began to close. Slowly. 1 centimeter a day. In a year, they'll be smaller. In 5 years, they'll stabilize. In 20 years, they'll be safe. Not immediately. Not by some miracle. Gradually. Like recovery. Like brewing tea. The leaves don't unfurl instantly. They need time and the right temperature. Min-gyu removed his hand from the stone. The glow remained, quiet, steady. The spire was no longer humming, it was singing. A low, soft sound, like the hum of a teapot just before it boils. Min-gyu turned and walked back. Toward the tea house. The snow was falling harder, it was covering his footprints. He went up to his room. He sat down at the table. 2 cups were still there. He picked up the teapot. He poured, one for himself, one for his sister. He set it on the table across from the empty chair. He picked up his cup. He took a sip. Oolong. The last of the oolong from the thermos. He'd been saving it for 3 years. A tiny pinch at the bottom of the tin can. Earthy oolong. His oolong. The very same one, the one he'd been carrying to his sister that night. Min-gyu drank and stared at the empty chair. Then the system displayed a line, a new one he hadn't seen before. System reboot activated. All nodes are operational. Network is stable. Note to the operator. The system has recorded the moment of your transfer. Residual communication has been preserved at the point of origin. The man who brought tea to your sister that night was the previous operator. The baker, his time in this world when you arrived. The system sent him back to his homeland, but before the transfer, he asked for one thing, to bring tea to the girl waiting on the night shift. The system fulfilled the request. Your sister received the tea. Min-gyu read the line. He reread it. His hands did not tremble. His eyes were not dry. He read and saw. The baker from a distant land, killed 400 years ago, whom the system sent home when Min-gyu took his place. And at the very last moment before returning, he asked that tea be brought to a girl he didn't know. Because the baker was just like that too. One of those who brings hot tea at 3 in the morning, one of those summoned by the system. The sister wasn't left alone. Someone had brought her tea. Mingyu set the cup on the table. He looked at the empty chair across from him, then at the cup for his sister. Full. Hot. Steam rose from it, snow outside the window. Behind the wall, the world was sleeping and beginning to recover. Mingyu stood up. He went downstairs. The tea room was empty. Night. Everyone had left. The tables were clear. The cups were on the shelves. So-yeon had arranged them there that evening. Stones from the stream. A sprig of mint. Silence. He walked over to the door. He opened it. Snow. Silence. And then the door creaked. Not from the wind. Someone had entered. Mingyu turned around. A man was standing in the doorway, wearing a travel coat. With snow, Mingyu couldn't see his face. The man pulled back his hood, young, about 25, dark-skinned, with the flour-stained hands of a baker, with eyes that had seen another world and returned. He looked at Mingyu. Mingyu looked at him. 3 seconds. The system displayed a line of text. Marco, Baker, former cameraman, returned. Status, client. Marco looked at the tea house, at the walls, at the shelves, at the cups, at the stones from the stream, at a sprig of mint. Then he looked at Mingyu and said one word. In a language Mingyu didn't know, but Mingyu understood. It meant home. Mingyu nodded. He stepped behind the counter, set down the teapot, poured in water, waited. 68 degrees, dropped in a leaf of moon mint. 45 seconds. Poured the tea, set it in front of Marco, placed a rye cracker next to it. Marco sat down, took the cup with both hands, brought it to his face, inhaled the steam, and smiled. Mingyu stood behind the counter, wearing an apron, with calluses on his hands. Sitting before him was a man who needed a cup of something hot. Snow was falling outside the window. The fissures were closing. The world was healing. Not from a sword, from a teapot, from the perfect temperature, from those 3 seconds when you look at a person and see not their rank but their pain, and you pour what makes the pain go away. Upstairs in the small room, there were 2 cups on the table. One was empty, his, one full for his sister. Steam rose toward the ceiling, slowly, quietly, like the breath of a house that had finally awakened.